Greetings. I'm Brother Bryant from the Congregation of Israel, the Biblical School of Global Liberation for all oppressed peoples. I am one of many representatives of the NMP, or the Nazarene Messianic Party, and I would like to welcome you all back to another installment this evening of our Thursday night book reading and dialogue, where we've been reading and dialoguing or examining a book titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed by author Paulo Freire. This evening, I'll wrap up my reading, which will be the end of chapter 2. Next week, God willing, we'll have another reader or another comrade that will present some information and, do some analysis on chapter 3. And we'll, center around, we'll center around that comrade in dialogue and discuss the things that we see within the chapter. But tonight is going to be, typical. I'll do a psalm reading, and I'll also do a brief recap of what we've read so far from chapter 1 to a little bit of chapter 2. Next week, for the most part, God willing, I'll be able to open up the discussion or the group on Zoom here or our classroom, and I'll introduce the reader, but I'll also real quick give a psalm and do a brief recap on the closing of chapter 2, and then I'll turn it over to the reader or our next comrade that'll be reading, and we'll give the name of the comrade at the end of this discussion here. But without further ado, I want to quickly read a psalm here, because I always start off with a psalm. That's kind of the thing that we do here at the NMP. We start with a psalm before we begin our reading. So this evening, I'll be reading Psalm chapter 1, a short psalm, Psalm chapter 1, out of the King James Version of the Bible, Psalms chapter 1. And it reads, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish." And that was Psalms chapter 1. Psalms chapter 1 from out of the King James Version of the Bible. So let's get this going, this recap here. I actually wanted to just kind of like with this recap, because my section tonight won't be too long. I might be done reading and explaining within no more than probably about like an hour to 30 minutes or 45 minutes at that. The reason why is because as we come towards the close of chapter 2, going into chapter 3, a lot of things Mr. Freire, and I'm going to read real, slowly and clearly. A lot of things Mr. Freire is now he's revealing, and it's very much self-explanatory. So it doesn't cause for a lot of elaboration. Some parts do, like the beginning of where I'll start my reading this evening. It causes for a little dialogue and well, of course, dialogue, but not necessarily a lot of elaboration, because of the fact that a lot of things that he will be saying will basically reveal the thought to you right away, like in the next sentence or something like that. So as we go through it, you'll see whoever's reading along with us, you'll see how Mr. Freire is going to be making statements, or he'll be saying something and he'll reiterate what he said, or he'll define what he means by what he's saying. So I won't do too much elaboration. The parts that we can center around dialogue on, that'll be just fine, because that's what we do this Thursday night reading for, is for dialogue and communication and learning and stuff like that. So without further ado, I don't want to stand on ceremony. I'll start my recap off in chapter 1. And I'm going through this just to kind of like get the thought what's being said or what's been said so far. So I'm not reading the whole chapter one. I just highlighted some points that I wanted to make references to. I wanted to make points from different references. Excuse me. So in chapter one, the first sentence, or the first sentence, he says, while the problem of humanization has always, from an exological point of view, been humankind's central problem, it now takes on the character of an inescapable concern. The reason why I started off with that is because I thought about the teachings that we've received at the NMP and all the information and literature that we've read over since I've been at the school, about 3.5 years almost. So I thought about all the information that we've read, and I know in the Communist Manifesto, Mr. Marx begins the manifesto by saying that since the beginning or the dawn of civilizations meaning plural, there's always been class struggle. And we know that with class struggle brings in antagonisms. And we know that these antagonisms could ultimately result in dehumanization, right? When you have class and you have hierarchy and such of that nature. So when I first saw, he said, while the problem of humanization has always, from an astrological point of view, been humankind's central problem. So this has been something that we've been facing for millennia, for centuries, right? This dehumanization, this attempt to regain humanity or regain Mr. Freire calls it our ontological vocation. So this has been a task, or it's been a struggle since the days of old, as old as the mountains, right? And I thought that was a good, interesting point to make, is because we see that we are up against, quite a battle, but it's more than capable for us to do this job or to do this work. And as we've been reading, Mr. Freire is explaining us, how do we do this work? How do we subdue or defeat this enemy, right? And I wanted to skip down a little bit. Well, not skip down. I'm going to go to the next page, and I want to point out another thing that he mentioned really quick here. Excuse me. He says, indeed, to admit of dehumanization as an historical vocation would lead either to cynicism or total despair. The struggle for humanization, for the emancipation of labor, for the overcoming of alienation, for the affirmation of men and women as persons would be meaningless. This struggle is possible only because dehumanization, although a concrete historical fact, is not a given destiny, but the result of an unjust order that engenders violence in the oppressors, which in turn dehumanizes the oppressed. This is the part that I want us to focus on. It says, because it is a distortion of being more fully human, sooner or later, being less human leads the oppressed to struggle against those who made them so. In order for this struggle to have meaning, the oppressed must not, in seeking to regain their humanity, which is a way to create it, become in turn oppressors of the oppressors, but rather restorers of the humanity of both. I brought that up because of the simple fact is that Mr. Freire is showing us that, like I was just mentioning, although this says, and Mr. Karl Marx mentioned in the Communist Manifesto, although we have seen this struggle for humanization since the beginning of our existence or civilizations, we must not, in our struggle or in our effort, we must not become basically immobilized, or we must not become like the oppressors. And that's very important, because it's so easy to go the way that everybody is going. Everybody seems to be, Mr. Freire mentioned the word fatalism. And it's very easy to become, cynical, like he mentioned, and in a fatalist state, whereas though this is just the way it is what it is. We can't change it. You know what I mean? So when we do things like that, when we start to begin to think like that, we eventually fall into that, that category of being like the oppressors, whether it's, becoming the next capitalist or just not doing nothing about the situation. Because notice, when we look at the oppressors, they're not doing nothing about this dehumanization or this antagonism. They're not doing nothing about it. So whether we are working and, they say hustling in the urban communities, whether or not we're doing that or not doing nothing at all, still we are becoming like the oppressors. We're taking on their sentiments. We're taking on their whole ideology and perspective. So Mr. Freire is warning us that we must not become, or we must not internalize the ways of the oppressor. And he also mentions in chapter 1 about this false generosity. And I know when Comrade RJ, the previous reader, when he was reading, he was doing chapter 1, he was talking about the false generosity. And the false generosity is a very interesting subject because, in other words, I know Comrade RJ, he explained it very eloquently, but I'm just giving you guys a recap so we can just kind of fill back in what the book is saying to us, chapter 1 and chapter 2. When we were talking about the false generosity, these guys do like philanthropy work. And in other words, they'll give out turkeys on these holidays, or they'll filtrate the water and give out clean drinking water. But the false generosity behind it is that they won't ever give us the means to production. And that same water or food that they're handing out, that water and food should be free and available to all. So in other words, they don't change the stage. The stage is still set, but they're going to give a couple of free things away, right? But they won't never, give us the means that we can go get our own water whenever it's, we need, or whatever we have use of it. They won't never do that, but they'll give us some clean water. They'll give us some food on, these different holidays that folks tend to celebrate, or they'll, stuff like that. They'll give us clothing and stuff like that, but they'll never give us the resources to have our own textiles, to have our own materials to make clothes. No, but they'll, here and there, they'll have some free clothes set out. I know in Philadelphia, they have like these things, they're like these contraptions, and they have clothes inside of them. Things called We Are the World or something like that. And they have clothes inside of them. You can go inside the thing and get clothes out of it, free clothes. They be like different various corners or whatever. And these are all examples of this false generosity. But meanwhile, they're not addressing the fact, why do people need clothes? Why do people need better drinking water? Why do people need food? See, that's where the false generosity comes in at. Why do we need these things? Why do people have their hand out in poverty? You know what I mean? You sitting here giving me something, but why do I need something? Why am I begging? Why am I a beggar? So this all is going into this false generosity. I want to skip over real quick to pages 19, and because I like this part that Mr. Freire had mentioned. This is in chapter 1. Whoever's reading along or following along with my recap, on pages 19, he says this lesson and this apprenticeship must come, however, from the oppressed themselves. And the lesson or the apprenticeship is the individual who is involving or is basically going into this historical process, Mr. Freire called it, of liberation and freedom for humankind, for all human beings, right? So he says this lesson and this apprenticeship must come, however, from the oppressed themselves and from those who are truly solidary with them, as individuals or as peoples. By fighting for the restoration of their humanity, they will be attempting the restoration of true generosity, right? Who are better prepared than the oppressed to understand the terrible significance of an oppressive society? Question mark. Who suffer the effects of oppression more than the oppressed? Question mark. Who can better understand the necessity of liberation? Question mark. I also wanted to bring out to you guys, after reading all these different things and going over chapter 1 again, notice how Mr. Freire is causing the reader, his audience, to self-reflect. He talks about self-reflection and how self-reflection is the generator, or that producing agent which gears us or makes us go into action. So when Mr. Freire asks these questions, who are better prepared than the oppressed to understand the terrible significance of an oppressive society? You start to think, or when he says, who can better understand the necessity of liberation? When you look at yourself in the condition or the position that you're in, whatever position that you're in, some of us may be listening to this and we well off. We don't think that we're oppressed, whatever. But I would argue that if you're paying for resources and food, you might be oppressed. You might be underneath the same antagonism, right? If you're paying for the necessities in which you need to live, food, shelter, water, and clothing, you might be a part of the oppressed class. But nonetheless, though, when I was reading this and as I've been studying it, now I'm starting to see how Mr. Freire is kind of encouraging the audience to this self-reflection. So there might be a praxis or there might be some type of action behind it. He mentions in chapter 2, without true or without real thought, there can be no action upon the world. Thought is meaningless if you don't take it and use it towards the world. You don't act upon your thoughts, so it's meaningless. It doesn't produce anything, right? So I also wanted to mention the fact that self-reflection, it can also be looked at as being conscious or being aware. So when Mr. Freire is constantly telling us about self-reflection, he's calling us to become more aware of our relationship to the world and to society. And like he mentioned before, not to become divided, or the book uses the terminology dichotomized, which means divided, not to become divided from the world, or not to look at ourselves as outside of the world, but to look at ourselves as inside and a part of the world. And our action, right? Our action and our way that we approach the world is what changes it. It doesn't change itself. It doesn't have to be like the society we live in now. It doesn't have to be a concrete society. It actually can be reinvented, but that only happens through reflection, through the conscience, and then that conscious or the thought, the reflection turns into action. Really quick here, I'm looking at my notes. I'm sorry, forgive me for that. Now, what I also wanted to talk about is as we get to chapter 2, we see that Mr. Freire starts talking about the banking concept of education. And what I thought was so good, because like, again, as you start to read the book, if you read it and you read it in your spare time, to those that are online with us and those that are watching, if you have the book and you read it, as you start to read the book over and over again, or go through the chapters and read them twice at least, you'll start to see how the whole thought is congruent. So when I thought about the banking concept of education, I found myself noticing that the banking concept of education is another form of false generosity. And why do I say that is because in the banking concept of education, which he explains in chapter 2, you have a teacher or an individual who gives you a curriculum or gives you an itinerary and says, here, this is what you need in order to, go from from grades 1 to 12. This is the curriculum. And this right here is going to secure your future, and it's going to get you a spot in this society that you can earn a living and make a way for yourself, right? But Mr. Freire mentions in chapter 2 as well about how banking education is almost the arch nemesis of problem posing education. And the banking education, the reason why I mentioned it being a false generosity is because, notice, they give us a curriculum, they give us an itinerary or a template or program, whatever you want to say, a prototype, whatever. And they make it seem as almost as if this is the way it is. It's no thinking outside of this curriculum. This is the curriculum, right? But the whole time, that same curriculum is used none other than to exploit and oppress us, right? So we think that, we're going to get these jobs. We're going to go to the 12th grade. We're going to graduate. We're going to go to college, get our degrees. We're going to come out here and work and be a part of this beautiful system, not realizing that this system or this society that we've been indoctrinated, or we've been inducted in, right? It's only to our detriment. It's only designed to make us work and produce, and never really experience life at the Knesset. I would argue that the way God intended us to experience life, right? It never really does that. It basically just makes you, it basically just makes you, in other words, docile, right? So I looked at this banking concept of education as another form of false generosity, because they make it seem like that, okay, we're going to give you a job. Okay, when you get this job, you'll be able to earn a living and take care of yourself. But on the other hand, why do I have to earn a living? Why aren't the resources free and available to all? Why can't I just receive the education? So of course, you need mathematics and reading and science like that. Okay, but why can't I just get that information just to have the fundamentals of knowledge. Why do I need that education in order to be able to get degrees and to be able to get, what's the thing called, diplomas and stuff like that, to get all these different certificates that, you know, I've received all this. I have, in other words, like Mr. Freer mentioned, I have all this knowledge deposited in me, and, you know, I can regurgitate it now, and therefore I get a thumbs up for that. And ultimately that thumbs up just basically is the golden ticket to say, come and get exploited, come and get oppressed. So when I started to look at the banking concept of education, I noticed the element of false generosity in it. It's really a false generosity. And this is what Mr. Freire is warning us about. And we also talked about in chapter 1 about the new man. And see, the new man, he begins to go through this self-reflection. He begins to go through this thought process. And as he goes through this thought process, he starts to see himself as becoming this new man, right? Because he's getting away from that ideal that there's nothing we can do about our situation. He's getting away from that ideal as though other human beings aren't important, or they're objects, or, you know, they're less than. He's getting away from all these ideals, and he's taking on a new way of thinking. So Mr. Freire had mentioned this new man concept. And I think Comrade RJ, our first reader, he talked about it. But you know, that new man, it always brings up some scriptures to the mind. So real quick, I just wanted to grab those scriptures. I won't be too long, but again, my reading won't be that long tonight anyway. I only got like 3 pages, so I'm going to kind of do this, and then about around 9:30, I'll start my reading for this evening. But just trying to bring us up to speed and trying to get us all into the thought process of it again. I know it's been a long week, and we're back at it again. But without further ado, I want to read these scriptures real quick, and then I'll keep going along with my recap. So the first scripture I wanted to read, as in regarding this new man, because I want y'all to bear with me as well, because I was seeing something this past week when I was reading these scriptures, actually. And maybe we can dialogue about it, you know, after I finish reading these scriptures and bringing my thought out, or we can dialogue that towards the end of the class. But the first one I wanted to read, and I think RJ touched on it again, but I'm just reiterating, was Romans 12:12. And again, we're talking about the new man. And Romans 12:12 mentions, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that we may prove that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. And the next one was 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, because we're talking about a new man. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Now, when I read, I know we hear Romans 12:2 all the time, you know, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. But I was thinking to myself, well, us not being conformed to this world, how do we transform our minds? So I was pondering on that for a minute. You know what I mean? I was meditating and praying and asking the Most High to give me more insight. But then when I thought about 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature, or he's this new man, and all things are passed away, and behold, all things become new. And I was thinking to myself, well, if I want to be transformed by the renewing of my mind, how does that happen? That happens when I become this new man. But according to the scriptures, in order to become this new man, we had to be in Christ. So I was then thinking about, well, what does it mean to be in Christ, and how do we be in Christ? So that led me to what was it? Let me get it right here. Oh, that led me to 1 John chapter 2, verses 5-6. And it reads, but whosoever keepeth his word, in him verily is the love of God perfected. It says, hereby know that we are in him. He that saith he abide in him, he that saith he abideth in him, ought himself also so to walk, even as he walked. So in order to be in Christ, because that's what 2 Corinthians says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. He's this new man that Mr. Freire is talking about. Old things are passed away. What old things? The way that we used to think. We wanted to be capitalists. We wanted to be the next oppressors. We wanted to be the next exploiters. All those old things are passed away. Behold, all things are come new. Romans 12:12 told us, do not be conformed to this world. What world? The order of things. Making money, profit, profit, profit. But be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, when we look at Mr. Freire, he's telling us about self-reflection, right? This conscious going over and seeing how do your actions and how do your activities, how do they relate to the social condition? What is your participation in this dysfunctional or disruptive society? And when you start to examine Paul's 12:2, I think that we start to see that the renewing of the mind is the same that Mr. Freire is talking about. He's talking about self-reflection and then action, right? But notice it says by the renewing of your mind that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Well, then I start to ask myself, well, what is this perfect will of God? That's the next question I came to. What's the perfect will of God? And that sent me down a long list of scriptures, laundry list of scriptures. But one of the things that came to my mind when he said that we may prove it, and he said that we may find it, was John 14:12. And I'm going to show you the correlation, what I meant. But I'm going to read John 14:12 to you real quick. And John 14:12 reads, verily, verily, or truly, truly, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. And of course, we always use the infamous Luke 4:18 to show these works. Now watch the correlation that I'm bringing out. Luke 4:18 says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. Now, when we see that these are the works that Christ did, that we should do also, we should set at liberty the captives, right? Who does this though? The new man that is in Christ Jesus. This who does this. Why? Because he's going through the same process that Mr. Freire is telling the proletariat or the oppressed to go through, which is this self-reflection, which Paul mentioned. Be not conformed to this world, right? So don't become docile, or don't get into the fatalism. Don't become cynical. Don't become fatalism. And in other words, I'm gonna bring out something. Hold on one second. I'm gonna show you guys something, because I got Romans 12:2, but I also wanted to get Romans 1 and 2. I'm gonna read them together for you to show you what I mean. How I linked it to Mr. Well, at least in my mind, I was linking it to Mr. Freire. So I'm gonna get Romans chapter 12, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by that, because Mr. Freire is talking about becoming this new man. We become this new man through self-reflection, or through our thoughts, through us considering or reconsidering all of our relations or all of our activities that is basically generating or keeping this tyrannical system alive or established, right? And once when we reflect, once when we renew by the transforming of our mind, what do we do next, right? So I want to read Romans 12. I want to read verse 1. It's very important. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. Notice that ye present your bodies, right? Your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now watch, and be not conformed to this world, verses 2, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The reason why I wanted to bring out verses 1, because Mr. Freire mentions about how the oppressed, the oppressor has this love for necrophilia, right? Necrophilia, right? And he mentions how the oppressor, has this insatiable desire to be a sadist or to turn everything into an object. He's real obsessed with mechanics or autonomous function of a human being. So notice what Paul is saying. He said, brethren, by the mercies of God, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, that ye present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, Mr. Freire is going to mention something about this. Watch this. I'm going to turn to page 42. In my book, it's page 42. I'm not sure what it is in the anniversary edition, because I lost track of pages from chapter 1. But in pages 42, notice what Mr. Freire is saying. I'm bringing this Romans 12:2 up to try to bring you guys to my thought process over this past week when I was reading Romans 12:2 and I was reading 2 Corinthians about this new man. Notice Paulo Freire says they cannot, he's talking about the oppressed, they cannot enter the struggle as objects in order later to become human beings. The struggle begins with men's recognition or self-reflection that they have been destroyed. So we cannot enter the revolution as objects. Paul just mentioned to us, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your body as a living sacrifice, not as objects, right? It says, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world. Don't become fatalistic. Don't become docile, right? But be ye transformed. Go through this self-reflection. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Reconsider, right? Think about it, ponder on it, meditate on it, your relation to this world, right? That ye may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We just read out of John 14, what was that? John 14 and 12, the acceptable or perfect will of God, right? And we read in John 14 and 12, I'm gonna get it right now, just so I can get the thought back. Because what I was trying to at least present is the fact that the perfect will of God is for us to, let me just get it. The perfect will of God is John 14 and 12. It's the perfect will of God because we want to be in Christ and we want to be like Christ. And 2 Corinthians mentioned us becoming this new creature. And then when we become this new creature, we are in Christ. And if we are in Christ, we believe on Christ and all of that, right? So verily, verily, again, John 14 and 12, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, he do also, and greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. Again, what are those works? When we go to Luke 4 and 18, he tells us what the works are. The works are, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. These are the works. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. Remember, Mr. Freire mentions this historical process to humanize mankind. So Christ just said that the Spirit of the Lord was upon him because he appointed him to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. So Paul is telling us that we have to renew our minds. Paul is telling us we have to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Then Christ adds on and tells us what? Because once when we present our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable God, so we can prove his perfect will. What's his perfect will? Luke 4 and 18. To set at liberty them that are bruised. Mr. Freire is saying the same thing, that we have to go through a self-reflection, right? That's Paul telling us that we have to have that's Paul telling us to go to self-reflection. That's Mr. Paulo Freire telling us that we have to have self-reflection. Paul's saying to transform our minds, right? Then Paul is telling us we have to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. On pages 42, Mr. Freire just mentioned that we cannot enter this historical process of freedom and liberation as objects, but as human beings. Paul is saying present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Paul is telling us we can't go in this deal where we're going to do Christ's will by setting at liberty the bruised. We can't go in this deal as objects or less than human beings. We can't go in this deal like that, as animalistic or necrophile, as dead, inanimate objects. We have to present our bodies as living sacrifices. So when I was reading all of this, I started to realize that at least from what I was gathering, is that the scriptures is conveying the same message to us, that we have to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Mr. Freire also mentioned in chapter 1 that the revolution will only take place when we aren't only occupied with it, but also preoccupied with it. So it becomes more than a job, it becomes a lifestyle, right? This struggle to liberate humankind, right? And that's what Paul's a living sacrifice. That means we just like Christ, we take off all the ways of the world. Our minds are transformed. We don't have any distractions, of making money. We don't have any distractions of going on vacation. We don't have any distractions of getting all the women. We don't have those distractions. We present our bodies as living sacrifices. We're preoccupied and occupied with setting at liberty them that are bruised. We're preoccupied and occupied with the historical process of freedom and liberation for humankind, so we can end this age-old antagonism of dehumanization of others. And when we start to look at this age-old antagonism of dehumanization of others, it all goes back to, if you are a Bible reader, or you subscribe to the scriptures, it's all going back to the way of Cain. When you really examine it, that's why when you read the scriptures, you kind of see, not kind of, but you see very often the Almighty keeps saying, "Thou shalt love thy brother in thy heart. Thou shalt love thy brother." Why? Because Cain hated his brother. And when you see individuals hoarding the resources, you see individuals exploiting others, oppressing others, giving them this banking concept of education, which is, again, false generosity. I got a carrot on a string, right? I'm not really letting you look at the world, and I'm not posing a problem, and we all come together as a collective on how do we fix the problem, right? How do we, no, I'm just giving you a carrot on a string. I'm giving you a curriculum. I'm telling you, when we look at that, is that love for thy brother? We have to consider that. The society that we live in, does it encourage the lifestyle of Cain, or is it encouraging this lifestyle that Paul and the Messiah is teaching us of, right? Where we have to set at liberty them that are bruised. Mr. Freire mentioned that this is a historical process. We have to liberate mankind. So I just wanted to draw that correlation. And we also, again, before we go in tonight, we also understand that when Mr. Freire is talking about the student and teacher relationship, again, because I know we've mentioned in past week before, I've reiterated, but again, he's not speaking about when an individual is studied or learned in a certain subject or a certain topic, that now the students can, overthrow or rebel and cause a revolt. That's not what he's talking about. We're talking about the pedagogy versus the banking concept of education, or the problem posing education versus the bank. What he's talking about in this particular situation is that, and he's going to mention it tonight when I begin the reading. He's going to mention how when we're looking at this subject, we're looking at this topic, teacher-student relationship, when it is in regards to liberation and freedom, it cannot and it shouldn't be. He even mentions, I left off last week, he even mentioned how, I'm going to get it real quick. He even mentions, he says, the revolutionary society, which practices banking education. Notice the key word is the revolutionary society. That means this is the society full of those new men and new women, the ones that presented their bodies as living sacrifices, right? The ones that have proved what is the perfect will and set the way of God. This revolutionary society, right? He mentions, which practices banking education, is either misguided or mistrusting of people. In either event, it is threatened by the specter of reaction. So he's telling us right there, whichever group of people, whatever society is trying to practice banking education, then that's not going to work. Why? Because it's a false generosity. That's why it cannot be. That's why it cannot. We're not talking about when a teacher knows something. That's not what Mr. Freire is talking about. He's talking about this method of teaching. The reason why that cannot be used with a teacher is depositing information in students, because it's a false generosity. That's why, because it's not revealing to the student the problems in society. No, what it is saying that this is the way it is. This is what you need to survive in this tyrannical or this exploitative society. Don't worry about why it's like that, right? You just go to school, get your diploma, your degree, and go ahead about your business. So that's why he's saying that cannot be, because why? That kind of teaching, or that kind of method of, not method, that teaching or that kind of ideology does not evoke in the students revolution, or does not poses the problems of society. Why are people hungry? Why are people sick? Why are people killing and doing all this foolishness? That kind of education doesn't pose any problems. It just basically encourages the problems to be there, or not encourage it, but it lets the problems remain, and we just work around it. In other words, don't do nothing about it. Don't worry about why it's drug dealers. Don't worry about why it's all these killings. Don't worry about why prostitution is going on. Don't worry about that. Just work yourself around it. So when we're trying to liberate humankind, that means we have to liberate the drug dealer. We have to liberate the prostitute. So I can't come to you with an education that does not pose problems, that does not cause us to be inventors, that does not cause us to think critically. Mr. Freire is saying that won't work when we're going through this historical process of freedom and liberation. That kind of education system just won't work. No, the students and the teachers, they must, and he's going to mention, and I don't want to spoil it, but the students and the teachers, they must look at these certain situations or these certain problems, and they must dialogue and communicate, and they must come to an agreement. Because he mentions in the book how the authoritative figure, when we go through this revolutionary process or this historical process of liberation, or the throwing away of dehumanization of human beings, we go through this process. He mentions that the authoritative figure at all times must be freedom or justice or liberation. The authoritative figure in this process to make men and women human again, the deciding factor must be freedom. Not the teacher, not the student, not the so-and-so. No, it has to be freedom. It has to be liberation. It has to be justice. And only that form of dialogue and communication, only that understanding will get us to end this age-old class antagonism. You know, so yeah, that's my recap for this evening. And I'll get right on into the reading for this evening. And I'm not, well, let me count it real quick. Okay, 76, 77, 78, 79. I'll be starting on pages 79 this evening in the anniversary edition. In my book, that should be page 52. I had the regular paperback edition, but that should be page 52. Now, I'm not sure how the print is in the anniversary edition, so those pages could be off. But last time I checked, it was pretty much on point. So as long as the print isn't different, then we should be on pages 79 and 9. If not, give or take, we're on pages 78. But I'm starting off at the paragraph which mentions unfortunately. Okay. So I'll get right into it because we're at like 9:40, and this won't take long at all. I mean, we're going to dialogue, of course, but a lot of things, like I said in the beginning of my my presentation or my recap, a lot of things are self-explanatory. Mr. Freer is going to mention some things. He's going to explain them right away. So without further ado, let's climb right on in this deal. It reads, unfortunately, those who espouse the cause of liberation are themselves surrounded and influenced by the climate which generates the banking concept, and often do not perceive its true significance or its dehumanizing power. Paradoxically, then they utilize the same instrument of alienation in what they consider an effort to liberate. Indeed, some revolutionaries brand as innocents, dreamers, or even reactionaries those who would challenge the educational practice. But one does not liberate people by alienating them. Authentic liberation, the process of humanization, is not another deposit to be made in them. Liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to transform it. Those truly committed to the cause of liberation can accept neither the mechanistic concept of consciousness as an empty vessel to be filled, nor the use of banking methods of domination, propaganda, slogans, deposits in the name of liberation. Those truly committed to liberation must reject the banking concept in its entirety, adopting instead a concept of women and men as conscious beings and consciousness as consciousness, intent upon the world. They must abandon the educational goal of deposit making and replace it with the posing of the problems of human beings and their relations with the world. Again, problem posing education, responding to the essence of consciousness. Intentionality rejects commoniques and embodies communication. It epitomizes the social characteristic of consciousness, being conscious of, not only as intent on objects, but as turned in upon itself in a Jasperian split. Consciousness as consciousness of consciousness. Liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transferals of information. It is a learning situation in which the cognizable object far from being the end of the cognitive act, intermediates the cognitive actors, teacher on the one hand and students on the other. Accordingly, the practice of problem-posing education entails at the outset that the teacher-student contradiction to be resolved. Now, really quick, before I start the next paragraph, I wanted to define a couple of words in here, mainly cognizable and cognition, and talk about a few things. Again, we see in the first paragraph, he mentions authentic liberation. And he says, authentic liberation, I know we hear liberation a lot in different, social groups, but he's saying that the authentic liberation is this process of humanization. And he also mentions in chapter 1, this humanization is the ontological vocation. It's this process where as though our whole entire concept of who we are, of being, consciousness, our whole way of thinking is revamped or is revolutionized, right? But he said this is the process of humanization, this authentic liberation. He said liberation is a praxis. So again, that goes into what I was trying to convey earlier, that by us presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice, that's the praxis, that's the action, right? Once we renew our minds, once we become transformed and renewing of our minds, we present our bodies as a living sacrifice. That's the praxis. Why? Because that way we can go set at liberty them that are bruised. That's what Christ is trying to convey or trying to teach us. So we see that liberation is a praxis. So it starts off as we learned at the school, at the Knesset, that the first form of this praxis, or this first form of this action, if you will, because praxis is just action. We defined it in previous weeks before. The word praxis means action. This fourth form of praxis is education, for us to relearn. And as we're relearning, that relearning process causes or evokes self-reflection or thought. When we start to learn the problems in our society, we start to think and we start to remember how we contribute, how we don't contribute, whatever the case might be. But that exercise or that praxis, that action of re-education is a part of the liberation process. Also, what I wanted to mention is he says, those truly committed to liberation must reject the banking concept in its entirety. Why? Because again, the banking concept is a false generosity. The educator, or this revolutionary educator, he's looking at everybody as just objects that don't know anything, right? They don't have, in other words, they don't have ideas. They don't have any thoughts. They don't have nothing to bring to the table. So he's saying that if we're really going to do this, everybody has something to say and bring to the table. Everybody has to present their body as a living sacrifice. Everybody has to do this, right? Not just one person, because that's not what Paul said. He didn't say this one person. Paul said he encouraged all the brethren to present their bodies as living sacrifices. So when he mentions that we have to totally throw away the bank concept of education, it's also going in again to humanizing ourselves, because the bank concept of education, I think it's mentioned on page 39, perhaps. He mentions how the bank concept of education, it just views us as objects. It just views us as easy to manipulate, easy to control. In other words, subordinate. In other words, the word subordination sums it up all. That's how the banking concept of education views the oppressed, right? And then at the bottom, one more thing, I want to define the word real quick, but those two words rather. But he mentioned, he said they must abandon the educational goal of deposit making and replace it with the posing of the problems of human beings and the relations of the world. See, because the educational method that only deposits information in you, that's that same method that we all got when we went to school. And that method did not show us any issues or any problems with our world. It just shows us how to work around it. It doesn't give us the incentive or that, we can fix this, we can change this. You know what I mean? We have ideals, we have experienced things, we have seen enough suffering, enough oppression, we've seen all these things, and something that we can do about it, right? Okay, if you want to be a doctor, he wants to be a lawyer, whatever, but can you use those gifts and those talents in order to cause this historical process or this authentic liberation, which is humanization? Can you use those gifts and talents to do that? No. The banking method, only thing that it does is tell you to go and be that lawyer, go be that doctor, and worry about you. Worry about your bank account. Worry about your family, your immediate family or whatever. Worry about you. It creates this self-autonomy in us. So he's saying that we have to abandon it. We have to produce problem-posing education. And why? Because we have problems in our society. I know they got a song called "We're Living Our Best Lives." We're not living our best lives. Absolutely not. People are dying. People are suffering. People are hungry. Not just here in the States, but all around the world. We've heard many testimonies. People are going through a lot. So we have to face the problems. We have to face the contradictions. And we have to figure out, how do we resolve the contradictions? How do we fix the issues? But real quick, I want to define that word cognition and cognizable. While I'm doing that, did anybody want to say something or bring something to the table? Give me a second here, but if anybody wants to say something, then by all means, you can climb right on in this deal. I just wanted to grab this definition, so that way I can just really read the sentence over real quick, and we can, gather the thought a little better of what do you mean. I know others might be a little up to par than I am, and they know what cognition means, but I didn't know it. And if anybody else didn't know, I guess I'll define it, and now we'll know. But cognition, it says a mental process, a product of these processes. So it's is it a noun? Yeah, it's a noun, cognition. So he says liberating education consists in acts of cognition, or this mental process, not transferals of information. It is a learning situation in which the cognizable, that's the one I wanted to get, that's a little different. And I didn't see it earlier spelled that way with Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster normally gives you like a whole bunch of other words that relate to it, but I didn't see cognizable. So let me get that one as well. They might have the same meaning, but just for clarity. And that one is also, no, that one's an adjective, excuse me. And it means something capable of being known, or I'm trying to get it. Hold on one second. To get to know something, to acquire knowledge of. So let's read that again real quick, just for clarity, if you guys don't mind, just for clarity. So it says liberating education consists in actions of cognition, which means relating to being in. Hold on, is that right one? I'm sorry, I had the wrong definition. Forgive me for that, y'all. Bear with me. I put in cognitive. I meant to put in cognition. I don't know why I did that. I just want to be clear. I just want to be thorough on because this is it's a dialogue and it's an examination, and we're reading critically. So I want to make sure that everything is right, that I'm saying is on point. So again, it says liberating education consists in acts of cognition, or in acts of mental processes. Okay, that's what cognition means, mental processes. Now, mental process, I want to keep that in mind. One second. And it says it is a learning, it says, excuse me, and a mental process is not transferals of information. So it is a learning situation in which the cognizable object, far from being the end of the cognitive act, intermediates the cognitive actors. And cognizable basically means being able to be known, or the knowledge of something. So did anybody want to bring something out? I know it's a little tongue twister there. Did anybody have any thoughts about what Mr. Freire is saying right there? If not, we can always come back to it and dialogue. But did anybody else want to bring something out about it?
Yeah, you were saying something about cognition. You said cognition is, what did you say it was? Your definition?
Cognition.
I don't know if it was complete.
One second, Elder. It told me mental process, but let me get it to make sure. Cognition. Yeah, it says it's a noun, and it says cognitive, mental processes. Concussion impaired the patient's cognition. Also,
I think you're reading probably the wrong. They look like they're applying it to the medical term.
Okay.
I think probably what you're looking for is the mental process, but it's like about acquiring knowledge.
Okay.
Or getting understanding or knowledge. So it's a mental process of getting knowledge or acquiring knowledge.
Okay. And was that the right one, Elder, for cognizable?
It sounded like it was. Yeah, if I recall what you said.
So you had any thoughts on that, Elder? Because I mean, like, it was a real a tongue tie for me. Cognition, cognizable. I was really trying to gather the thought, but right then and there, I really could. I wanted. I mean, I defined the words earlier, but I just couldn't. I couldn't grasp the thought he's saying. He said, "Liberating education consists in acts of cognition," and you said that's mental, the acquiring of mental processes, right? He says not
Why
transfer.
it's a process that, oh, read it again. That what you just read, the sentence.
Yes, sir. It says liberating education consists in acts of
Oh,
cognition.
it consists in acts of acquiring knowledge and understanding.
Okay. Not transfers of information, which would be the banking concept.
Right.
Okay. Then it says it is a learning situation in which the cognizable object, and it has in parentheses, far from being the end of the cognitive act, intermediates the cognitive actors, teacher on the one hand and students on the other. See, that's the part that confused me when it said is a learning situation in which the cognizable object, and when it puts in parentheses, far from being the end of the cognitive act.
Because it appears he's saying that the knowledge will with the individuals of the peoples, which will be students and teachers with their learning. He said, as far the knowledges that they come to will far, it won't be like the end of the situation. If because I don't have the text in front of me, but he looks like he's arguing that it will continue, like you will continue to gather knowledge, gather information through whatever thought or experiences, if I follow that line of thought, because I don't have the text in front of me.
Okay.
So read it again with that idea. He's talking about the teacher, the student, and then he said the cognitive. Is that what he said?
Yeah, he
cognitive
says,
object.
He says he said the cognitive actors, teachers on the one hand and students on the other. Yeah, he says the cognitive object. Excuse me, the cognitive actors.
Okay.
So let me read it again. It says liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transfers of information. So we know that that's talking about the pedagogy and the banking concept of education is like, one versus the other. He's saying it happens through the pedagogy, right? So then he says it is a learning situation in which the cognizable object, far from being the end of the cognitive act, intermediates the cognitive actors, teacher on the one hand and students on the other.
So the cognitive objects are the teachers and the students. So I don't, did you look up cognitive? It should be relating to something like
you said, mental process, right?
That's cognitive. Wait a minute, cognitive. Wait, he using two variations of it.
Yeah, the two variations is cognition. No, three variations: cognition, cognizable, and cognitive.
Okay, so yeah, cognitive. That's probably what I was thinking of then. Yes, it is that process of acquiring knowledge through thought.
Hey, I got a different definition for cognition.
Okay. So
you want me to read
addressing the cognitive first, that part where he says the cognitive, what did he say, the cognitive? Because I don't have the book in front of me.
He says
cognitive elements.
No, he says it is a learning situation in which the cognizable object.
The objects, right?
Yes, sir. The cognizable objects. Far from being.
Akish, you just said you had a definition for which were the words?
Cognition.
He said cognition.
Yeah, he said
cognition. Yeah.
Okay. So the cognitive objects I better just go grab my book. But anyhow, if we're looking at cognitive, we're talking about the cognitive objects. We're talking about whatever is involved in this intellectual activity. So that's why he says students and teachers. So now, what was the definition that you had there? While I go grab my book on cognition.
Cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses.
Yeah, that's the definition we read. Or that's the that's what
That's the definition we're saying, Elder. Because remember, I was talking about a medical term. I think it was like you told me.
Yeah, you talking about the medical term. So
Uh,
yeah, the definition he just read, that's we're talking about
Which
the
dictionary you got?
process of acquiring knowledge through senses, through thought, and that's cognition, right?
Yeah, cognition. Yeah.
Right. So that is the process. Cognitive objects are those engaged in the process, the teachers and the students. They're the cognitive objects participating in cognition.
So they're participating in this process of acquiring knowledge.
Right. And they're the objects. They're the cognitive objects.
Okay.
You understand what we saying? What it's saying?
But cognitive was, what was cognitive again? I got cognition, but what was cognitive again? Because they're the cognitive objects, meaning that what? Okay, they're these conscious beings, basically, right? Because he mentions above how he says consciousness as consciousness of consciousness. Then he says liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not trans. So when he calls them cognitive objects, is he relating to them as being like these thinking conscious beings? Is that what you mean by that?
Not just thinking conscious beings, but they're involved in an intellectual activity.
Hey, cognitive. Let me read that definition right quick. It said relating to cognition, the cognitive processes involved in reading.
Yeah, if you look in Webster's, it should add a little bit more to it.
I got the web app. I don't know how it gave me a medical definition now. That's crazy.
Yeah, they do that. You just gotta continue to look through, but it's cognitive.
Hey, and if you're looking up cognition in Webster app, if you go to the bottom, you get the etymology. I pasted it in the chat. And actually like the origin of the word, which do means comprehend to get understanding. But
that's cognition.
I got the definition of cognitive from Webster's on the app right here.
Yeah, it should be the intellect. It's like an intellectual activity.
It says of relating to being or involving conscious intellectual activity such as thinking, reasoning, or remembering.
Yeah. So the student and the teacher, they're the cognitive objects. They're the one who's engaged in this intellectual activity.
Okay. That's I'm sorry. I was writing that little note down at the bottom of it.
No problem.
Thank you, gentlemen, because I appreciate that. Because I was like, man, maybe that'd be something that when I'm doing the reading, we can just dialogue about it. I know that's a part of the process that Mr. Freire is talking about. That we do more than just have comments, but have communication and dialogue. So as I was going through the things that I understood, things I didn't understand, I pondered and meditated it. But I said, you know what? Is try to do something different with this reading. The things that I don't understand, we bring it up. And, we have dialogue about it. So listen, we all learn from each other. And if somebody knows, then the other person doesn't know. They learn and they take notes. So I wanted to kind of like practice what Mr. Freire is actually talking about in the book. So that's why I left that for this evening. But now I'm kind of worried because I don't want to keep getting definitions wrong. But if so, I know I got the comrades. I know you got your brothers and sisters on with me. So if I get the definitions wrong, can somebody grab the definition for dialogical for me? Because I want to make sure I got the right definition. Because I keep coming back to the root word of dialogue. I wanted to define that word. but it was telling me, I'll give y'all my definition and see if y'all if you got your dictionary with you out to see if you come up with the same thing. Because my dictionary is just telling me an adjective relating to or in the form of dialogue. Can you grab that word for me, please, Ak, if you buy your dictionary, sir?
Hold on. What word you looking for?
It's dialogical. Dialogical. Just to make sure I'm on point. And I mean, that's the.
I think you got the proper definition. Well, he could confirm it.
Yeah, relating to or in the form of dialogue.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay, so it says dialogical relations indispensable to the capacity of cognitive action to cooperate in perceiving the same cognizable object are otherwise impossible. It says, indeed, problem-posing education, which breaks with the vertical patterns characteristics of banking education, can fulfill its function as the practice of freedom only if it can overcome the above contradiction. Through dialogue, the teacher of the students and the students of the teacher cease to exist, and a new term emerges, teacher-student with student teachers. The teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. They become jointly responsible for a process in which all grow. In this process, arguments based on authority are no longer valid in order to function. Authority must be on the side of freedom, not against it. Here, no one teaches another, nor is anyone self-taught. People teach each other, mediated by the world, by the cognizable objects which in banking education are owned by the teacher. The banking concept, with its tendency to dichotomize everything, distinguishes two stages in the action of the educator. During the first, he cognizes a cognizable object while he prepares his lessons in his study of, or his laboratory, During the second, he expounds to his students about that object. The students are not called upon to know, but to memorize the contents narrated by the teacher. Nor do the students practice any act of cognition, since the object towards which that act should be directed is the property of the teacher rather than a medium evoking the critical reflection of both teacher and students. Hence, in the name of the preservation of culture and knowledge, we have a system which achieves neither true knowledge nor true culture. It says the problem-posing method does not dichotomize the activity of the teacher-student. She is not cognitive at one point and narrative at another. She is always cognitive, whether preparing a project or engaging in dialogue with the students. He does not regard cognizable objects as his private property, but as the object of reflection by himself and the students. In this way, the problem-posing educator constantly reforms his reflection in the reflection of the students. The students no longer, the students no longer docile listeners are now critical co-investigators in dialogue with the teacher. So when I was reading that, I was, again, I mentioned earlier how he said the authority was going to be on the side of freedom. So that would be like the authoritative figure in this process of humanization. But again, that word cognition was hitting me. So, it was tearing me up all week. So now from what I'm understanding is that these students and teachers, they're in this, as Elder said, they're in this, as Elder said, in along with the definition, they're in this process of leaving the banking concept of education. And now with dialogue, they are engaging in intellectual conversations and they're looking at these objects or these problems, these what we call cognizable objects. They're looking at these objects and these problems, and through he mentions it. Excuse me. He mentions I'm looking for it. Yeah, he mentions it as the property of the teacher rather than the medium of vocal and critical reflection for students is the name of perception. I'm sorry if you bear with me, y'all. I lost it. But he mentions how the cognizable object is an instrument used for the teacher to learn and the students to learn together. So what I got from that is that happens, like how we was just looking at cognitive, that happens from the dialogue. That's how this whole process, and that's how everything works, especially when we're talking about problem posing education. We all have different perspectives towards a particular problem. Now, not to say that someone that has studied and they know more, that this person that don't know anything, they're going to overthrow what the person is saying. No, but everybody is bringing their perception or just a little bit of their thought to this particular object or this particular problem. And they're all engaging in this conversation on how to address this problem or how to correct, or whatever the case might be. So now I'm starting to understand that this is cognitive and cognition. This is a practice only found when we're talking about pedagogy or when we're talking about problem posing education. You don't find this process in banking education. The reason being is because the teachers and the students, they don't interact, and they don't, in other words, they don't present problems, right? Like when you get 4 times 4, and I think when Sister Comrade Kaya was on, she read the section where it's though she said the students just learn that 4 times 4 is whatever answer, or the capital of Paris is Baalim. See, they're just giving you they pose the problem, but then they give you the answer. It causes no critical thinking. It doesn't cause you, or it doesn't make you go into the resources of your brain, your intellect, and really hammer out what's being said. What's not what's being said, but what are we dealing with? What's the problem that's being posed? So it's, in other words, being concept education, it just gives you the answer. You're supposed to remember the answer, and that's it. So what I was reading this, I noticed now after I got the definition clarified by you comrades, is that we only find these kinds of practices within the pedagogy or within problem posing education. You won't find it in banking concept, because the banking concept doesn't look at the students as having anything to say. It actually looks at the students as being objects, or like he said before, containers, willing to receive information, or receptacles, and all that kind of stuff. So did anybody else want to bring something out or add anything to that?
I didn't catch the part you was discussing, but the last end it sound like
Or still off a little bit.
No, sound all right. But one thing I would say is always for the clarity is pedagogy is the method.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
That's why I'm saying pedagogy of the oppressed. It's the method of teaching the oppressed. So
yes,
the method of teaching the oppressed is through dialogue.
And this could sound like a foreign language too at some point. This is I mean, I know I ain't gonna grasp a lot of this, like at the on face value, but a lot of this book requires study, because it's difficult to grasp a little bit, for me at least.
Yeah, sometimes it seems as if like the words kind of trip you up, and that's why like I keep trying to find like the parallels between the chapters. You know what I mean? So that's like, I mean, I know everybody thinks differently, and everybody, they learn differently. But that was one of the things for me to like read chapter 1 over again, then read chapter 2 over again, and then try to draw the parallels. Because what I constantly keep seeing is like, I mentioned this a couple of weeks before about how you can see the use of the dialectical method. You see the contradictions found in teacher-student. So how do we resolve those contradictions as we learn to dive? And then you see certain stuff, like the thing I was mentioning earlier about the false generosity and the being concept of education. They give you a curriculum, and Mr. Freire mentions false generosity in chapter 1. So the false generosity, we know that, they do philanthropy, they give out certain stuff and whatever. And they do the same thing with this banking concept of education. So they set the world up and put the world the way it is. It's like it's pillars, it's fixtures, it's structure. Now they don't give you the tools in order to make a better world, whereas though everybody gets something to eat. No, they only give you the tools to figure out how you're going to eat, right? And then once when you figure out how you're going to eat and you come into their labor force and their job force, they're like, look, we gave y'all jobs, we educated y'all, but really they didn't do nothing but incorporate us or induct us into this process of being exploited. So that's why I was mentioning earlier about the false. So that's what I tried to do with, like, just because I know a lot of it for me as well was like, and it still is, it's very hard because, you know, we're going through this re-education process. And I start to realize that stuff like this, you need to bounce off the scriptures with it, and you got to keep meditating on it. And I'm hoping that that readers after me, they follow suit. And a lot of things that you don't understand, you bring it to the conversation on Thursday night. So like, look, I don't understand it. What are you guys reading from it? Because when I was reading Cognition, I mean, I stayed on that for like 2 days. I was on that from like Sunday to probably about like Tuesday. And I still couldn't get it. So I say, look, let me just bring it to the class on Thursday, because that's what I guess, well, not I guess, but that's what I'm learning that we're encouraged to do with this teacher-student deal is to dialogue and to communicate amongst one another, because we're trying to learn this historical process of liberation. We're trying to learn how to be effective when doing it, not just, you know, like he said, you know, we just following commoniques and slogans. We just saying how bad capitalism is, or we're just saying how we don't want to be oppressed. And we have to learn our relation to the oppression, stuff like that. So you absolutely right. I agree. Like this joint is like still, you know, mind-boggling in certain instances. But through the grace of God, we'll get through it, and we'll keep praying and asking the Almighty to deliver to us understanding. That way, as we're going through it, it'll bring more clarity to us. Elder, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's just it's the process of most of so, for lack of better words, the so-called what they call leftist or revolutionary literature. It's just really learning a language. Because I mean, whether it's Paulo Freire, whether it's Jose Miranda, Karl Marx, you know, I was listening to a guy today. He does pretty good videos on socialism. He was making reference to the Black Panther Party when they was doing a political education class. He said that the people came there armed with a dictionary in hand, because it's now just a part of the process of learning the language. And they already said it, that Marx himself said, yes, it's arduous. His writing is, you got to struggle. But he said, if you climb it, then you will reach the summits of light. So it's, you know, that is that struggle in knowledge and understanding. So that's definitely true. It's not just a easy read, but it's a read where you have to struggle. And that's a good thing. But I was also explaining that when you saying pedagogy, you said for clarity, the method isn't found in the pedagogy. The method is found in dialogue, because the pedagogy itself is the method. You understand what I'm saying? So we say if the method is found in pedagogy, it's like we saying the method is found in the method.
Okay, gotcha.
So pedagogy is simply the method. That's why you have the method, or it's a way and a method of learning and or teaching. So this is the idea, the pedagogy, or the method to teach the oppressed. That's why it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think you have another one, Pedagogy of the Heart. You have a lot of books with this idea of the method of learning. Okay, and so that's just for clarity when you're talking about it. So the method of the oppressed, or the pedagogy of the oppressed, he's arguing that it is through dialogue. So the oppressed can take part in the educational process. You know, so it's not just you just tell them, but that seemed to be where he's working towards. They're a part of this educational process. You talk to them, you ask questions, they give feedback, they explain what they seen and heard through and how they understand certain things and whether they understand it or not. That's why he's saying it's important to get their feedback, because they know things. So we have to find out what they know, why they're being instructed, and certain perspective that they present off of a situation. He's arguing both instructor and student could learn from it. So that's the importance of the dialogue or the dialogical process. You understand what I mean?
Yes, sir, Elder. Yes, sir. And you said that dialogue, the dialogue is the method, right?
Yes, the dialogue is the method.
Okay. But the pedagogy,
It's just another word for saying method.
okay, I got you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so pedagogy is simply a synonym for pedagogy, is a method of teaching.
Okay. And this in pedagogy versus banking concept of education, right?
No. Banking
Would be the would be that.
education also is a pedagogy.
Oh, okay.
You see, but it's the banking pedagogy. And that pedagogy, he's saying, isn't for the oppressed.
Okay, I got you. But like you see how you were saying that dialogue is the method. So what would be the method in banking education? Basically, like, you see what I'm saying?
Method, that is the method, banking. You just do what I say.
Okay. I got you.
And the pedagogy, so you could say the pedagogy of banking education, if you will. It's just, that is the method. You just, here's the list of rules. I don't want no feedback from you. Do what I tell you to do. That's what he's saying. That pedagogy isn't of the oppressed. It's not how you teach the oppressed. It's not how the oppressed learns, or should I say, benefits from the learning as well. You have to engage in dialogue. That's the pedagogy of the oppressed, or that's the method to teach the oppressed.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Elder. You wanted to say something, my brother?
No, I was just gonna further express that, like, from the previous point of the difficulty of understanding some of this. It's not that I can't catch it, because a lot of it I can catch in the context, but like he explained it well when he said it's like a right-wing language, and you have to just understand that language. And that makes, when he said that makes total sense, because it's very familiar to what I hear from that arena there. And so through context, I can understand a lot of, the premise of what's being brought out, but it's the details and some of the wording that you really have to look up in order to digest the full meaning of what he's trying to say. And so in essence, that's still going to take time, because it's like you're learning a new language. You know what I mean? So that's it's nothing wrong with it. It's all good. I'm down for the challenge, but that's what I'm starting to notice here.
No, I appreciate that raw honesty, because I was like, man, listen, cognition. Listen, I'm done, man. I closed that book real quick. I said, I'm done. And I mean, you absolutely right. It's like learning a new language. That way, when you see the word right away, like when you hear the word yes, we all know what yes means. That's like we hear the word the, it's an article, we all know what that means. Or like we hear the word book. I mean, that's like it's like secondhand to us. We know what that means. It takes time to remember that. Okay, dichotomize means to divide. To remember that, praxis means, it takes time for that. So I definitely agree with you, bro. And I mean, I appreciate you even saying that, because that stuff like that, man, it lessens the load. You know what I mean? It makes you know that everybody else is, the other comrades, the other brothers and sisters, they're learning too, and they're at the same, you know what I mean? So I really appreciate that.
That the struggle is real.
Absolutely, man. Affirmative, comrade. Okay, so look, I'm gonna pick back up with this real quick. It says, the teacher presents the material to the students for their consideration and reconsiders her earlier consideration as the students express their own. The role of the problem-posing educator is to create, together with the students, The conditions under which knowledge at the level of the doxa is superseded by true knowledge at the level of the logos. Whereas banking education synthesizes and inhibits creative power. Problem-posing education involves a constant unveiling of reality. The former attempts to maintain the submersion of consciousness. The latter strives for the emergence of consciousness and critical intervention in reality. Students, as they are increasingly posed with problems relating to themselves and the world and with the world, will feel increasingly challenged and obliged to respond to that challenge because they apprehend the challenge as interrelated to other problems within a total context, not as a theoretical question. The resulting somebody want to say something? Oh, I think your mic's unmuted, Elder. It says the resulting comprehension tends to be increasingly critical and thus constantly less alienated. Their response to the challenge evokes new challenges, followed by new understandings, and gradually the students come to regard themselves as committed. Education as the practice of freedom, as opposed to education as the practice of domination, denies that man is abstract, isolated, independent, and unattached to the world. It also denies that the world exists as a reality apart from people. Authentic reflection considers neither abstract man nor the world without people, but people and their relations with the world. In these relations, consciousness and world are simultaneous. Consciousness neither precedes the world nor follows it. Did anybody have any thoughts about anything that was said?
Yeah, I'm trying to gather what page, because when you said you had 3 pages, do you really mean 6?
I don't know. It all depends on like the printing in that anniversary edition.
No, like when you count your pages, you got to count front end. If you got one leaf is 2 pages.
Yeah, so I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 10 pages. I don't know why I said 6. I got 10 pages here.
No, you said earlier, you said you had 3 pages to finish. So that threw me because I'm trying to figure out where you picking up at.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did.
Yeah, you said you had 3 pages left, so you said it wasn't that long.
So hold on a second. The 76, 77, 78, 79, 80. I started off tonight on pages 52. That should be 80 in your book. Pages 80. You see a paragraph starts off that says, unfortunately.
Yeah, so when you say you got 3 pages, you got 6.
Yeah, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said I had 3
now,
pages.
6 is a lot of reading. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot.
Yeah, so I may have to chop it up and split it up again for next week. You're saying basically?
Yeah, I mean, if you got 6 pages, then you probably, it's just, yeah. I mean, each page, when you got 3 pages, you should only have 1 leaf and a half. When you got 3 leaves, you got 6 pages.
Yeah, I got 6 more pages, y'all.
Yeah, you just don't read through 6 pages, especially a book like this, in 30 minutes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
you know
sir.
What I'm saying? So you said you started off on page 80.
80, yeah, where it says, unfortunate. I want to make sure I get that right, so I should have called you and asked you before. But like, do you see something on 80 that says, unfortunately, those who espouse the cause of liberation are themselves surrounded? Because that's the paragraph. Huh?
Is that how it starts off? What paragraph is that?
Yeah, like on my page 52, it starts off right at the top of the page. Like you got like a little bit of so we were looking at that last paragraph, and he had mentioned education as the practice of freedom as opposed to education as the practice of domination. Again, we see that the back and forth between the two methods, okay, the two styles of teaching. Now it says denies that man is abstract, isolated, independent, and unattached to the world. It also denies that the world exists as a reality apart from people. Authentic reflection considers neither abstract man nor the world without people, but people in their relations with the world. In these relations, consciousness and world are simultaneous. Consciousness neither perceives the world nor follows it. Did anybody want to bring something out about that?
Yeah, I just want to get, since we were talking about it, just gives an example now of the pedagogy in which he's describing. Again, because we read past it, but I think if people picked it up or not, but just to go over, students, as they are increasingly posed with problem relating to themselves in the world and with the world, will feel increasingly challenged and obliged to respond to that challenge. So here is an example of how the student is to learn. So the instructor will present the student with problems relating to themselves in the world. So this is his point. And then the student will take up that challenge and try to understand, right? Their response to the challenge evokes new challenges followed by new understandings. So now he's describing how the process happens and how it looks. So the educator is sharing knowledge, the students are assessing their situation, commenting on their situations. You see, this is the feedback part. So not like we were saying before, where they're not just voicing any opinion, but it's still this teacher who's not just telling them information without feedback. So they're getting the information and they're responding. So now from the feedback, he also explained that now the educator, he or she will now know more from whether it is what the student know, what the student don't know, or a revelation which the student may bring to the teacher as the student explain this situation that has been presented to them. And they may bring something, oh, the instructor, man or woman may say, well, yeah, you know, that's interesting. I didn't look at it that way. And so from that process, this is how they're learning. So here he's describing the pedagogy of the oppressed. He's describing the processes of true dialogue opposed to banking. And I just wanted to bring that out because now he's actually explaining how it looks real time. If you understand what I mean, if that's clear.
Yes, sir. So he's basically kind of like giving us a visual on how this dialogue or communication works as opposed to the banking concept. Yeah, I got you.
Absolutely. That's why he said in the beginning, the teachers presents the material to the students for their consideration and reconsiders her earlier considerations as the students express their own. So once the students give feedback, then the instructor will reconsider what they were saying, go back over what they were saying to see if it fits, see if it needs to be adjusted, see if you can add to it. That's that reciprocal student teacher student idea. That's what he was working up towards. And this is just in contrast to being expressed earlier when he was talking about the banking situation. It's not just you just get into a room and the student want to talk about the subject without much knowledge on the subject, but just how they feel. No, it's the instructor presents the material, and then that begins that dialogical process. And from what's being presented to the student, then the student gives feedback. Okay, well, what do you think about this? And the student will give feedback. And often that feedback will help also the instructor. And, you know, just, I think that's the process. It makes me think about Dave Harvey, who reads and gives a course on capital. And I remember he said in his course of doing this throughout the years, he said one class in particular, they from their understanding and dialoguing on capital, he said actually taught him a whole, you know, new perspective of things as they applied it to certain situations. So, you know, I think that's what he's saying. This idea of pedagogy of the oppressed is this is what goes on in this struggle to learn, whether student and teacher, because and then it goes in different roles. Because now when the student is bringing something to the table that they gathered from the material, then at that moment in time, the student becomes teacher. And so this is the, you know, the reciprocal process. This is what he said, just the roles being played. Not that they necessarily, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's not that, now I know everything, but no, everyone is still dialogue. And then the student, as student, then they will gather more data, gather more material from the instructor. And then then that process will start all over again. If it's clear, you know what if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, sir. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Did anybody else want to add on to what Elder said? Okay, no worries. I think, yeah, when you was mentioning that, I looked at where he said he mentions it, I think, like in the second paragraph, he said problem posing education involves a constant unveiling of realities. So like you were saying, like when he brings things for when a teacher brings things for the students to consider, you know, then they can have this particular, not particular, they can have this dialogue back and forth on this particular subject. Again, not saying that, you know, again, that students going to rebel or overthrow the teacher, but it's kind of like giving us this visual of how it looks, you know, to a different form of education. I think that's one of the reasons why I really couldn't grasp a lot what was being said towards the closing of chapter 2. But then when I started to consider all the classes that we've had on Saturdays, the Sabbath, excuse me, and the classes that we've had on Monday and stuff like that, how you know, you and Elder Tim, you always say, hey, you know, what you guys are thinking. I mean, you guys wanted to, you know, questions, comments. And then like when people start talking, you know, Sister Mary, whoever, I see how you guys engage, and it's like, oh, okay, I never knew that. Okay, and so that's the only. It was kind of a shame that I couldn't, you know, think about no teacher in high school that actually gave us that kind of teaching. So the only people that I've actually witnessed practice that was those at the Knesset, the NMP actually. So I could kind of tell that you guys either are truly genuine or you read this book a million times already and not telling nobody. But nonetheless, whatchamacallit,
Yeah, I do want to add to that.
Yes, sir.
Also. Yeah, because that's to respond on that part. Yeah, that's the way we learn, all of us. You know, that what he's saying in the book confirms a lot of the other things that we was, you know, different positions in which we hold. But this is the same idea when we talk about when anyone else was going out to evangelize, we would say, stop giving all of the answers. Because if you're talking and answering everything, that is a form of banking. And that form of banking in that particular sense might cause a problem, even in your evangelizing. So we say, well, you don't always have to answer questions. You ask questions. And sometimes that helps the person. If you're a debater, if you're debating, asking the question will sometimes cause your adversary to fall into his own ditch or to come to a standstill where they don't know, because you're not just in inputting things in them. But what you're doing is now you're dialoguing actually. Now it's just working a different way. You're just applying the same method in a debate where you're dialoguing. And so when you're asking questions in your dialogue or in a debate, or not trying to answer everything, but you asking more questions for the person you're talking with to respond as well, that also helps you to know how to respond and to know where to go and what to use, know where this person is coming from. So it even works in verbal warfare as well, where you begin to also learn the nature of those who's opposing you simply by doing this same process. Asking, getting as much feedback. Like I would talk to people, I advised to this person, I was telling them about this, I was telling them about that. And not too long ago, I was asking a sister, I said, well, what is their position? What do they believe? Well, I don't know. Well, why don't you know? So when you say you don't know actually their position, you don't even know what they believe. So you don't really know what to tell them. So you probably said a lot of stuff that could be over their head. They didn't get it. So that's why it's important. Wait a minute. All right, you got to get the feedback. So now you know what you can talk about, what's not to talk about, or you can also learn because they may be familiar with certain situations, or something is revealed and they may present something to you at that moment in time that helps you to carry. Now you can carry this with you and educating someone else on the same thing. So it just, this method works in many different ways, not just in the classroom, but it also works out there debating. It works going, verbal warfare. It just works. Evangelizing, so you know what to say to that person in the street, because you got to do a lot of listening and a lot of questions or asking questions. If you understand what I'm saying is clear.
Yes, sir. I think that I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I remember I forget what broadcast we were on. I know it was one of the classes, maybe it was on Thursday or Wednesday, but you and another comrade, I believe it was Ak, maybe, I'm not sure, or either comrade Kevin, y'all were making mention of how even when Christ dealt with the Pharisees, he wouldn't answer their question, he would ask them a question. And I know you told me many times about like the clubhouse deal and all that, don't say too much. And I mean, also, Uncle Nishan told me the same thing, and I started to realize, and now when you just said it, was just more reaffirming that, yeah, sometimes that might, well, not even sometimes, that is the banking concept of education. When you dialogue with somebody, you're debating, and yet you're asking them stuff, and then you immediately go and answer it. No, let them, let them come to their own, let them, use their mind a little bit, and let them exercise it and come to their own conclusions, and it may work for your good because you may have the upper hand, especially in verbal warfare. So I'm glad you brought that out because, again, when you see the Messiah in many instances, people come to ask him questions. He would ask them questions, or he would answer in a parable, and so forth and so on. So now I'm realizing, as you just said, evangelizing, debating, that form of communication or dialogue is very profitable, because that way, if we are blessed to be theoreticians and teachers, as we go out and evangelize, that might be a better form of getting people to think. Because if you give somebody all the answers, they'll go back and just regurgitate it, and they tell the next cat down the road, and they get it all wrong and all mixed up. Now people, they don't even know your position. So you say a little bit and cause them to think, and that also can be like a deal where like a bird feeder. It constantly keep bringing that person back to you, so they want to learn more and they want to educate themselves, and eventually they'll become laborers in this historical process. So no, I appreciate that. That's I'm glad that you made mention of that. Anybody else want to add on to that?
I don't know if some of you brothers, I'm pretty sure a couple of brothers remember Elisha, the elder out of Cincinnati. And he had somewhat of that method. It was funny because I said verbal warfare, but it's probably funnier hearing it from him. I mean, he's passed now, but he called it jujitsu. He says jujitsu, using the other man's weight against himself. But in essence, what he was saying is correct, but he was using it in the form of debate, where you cause people to answer and respond so you can gather where they're coming from. But yeah, but to confirm it, yeah, that's definitely a good method to use in many different things. So I'll yield.
Okay, so it's around 10:45. I'm just going to jump into this last page. I'll take it up to like almost like 11:55, and then I'll stop. So because I know we're going to be stopping and starting and dialoguing on the way there. So let me start on pages 55, and it reads.
You said 11:55.
Yeah, I was gonna like bring up like the last 5 minutes. That way we can have 5 minutes or whatever to dialogue, and if comrades, are tired.
11:55 or 10:55.
I'm sorry, 10:55.
Oh, okay. All right, got it.
Forgive me for that. I'm sorry, y'all. So page 55 reads on my book. It says, in one of our culture circles in Chile, the group was discussing based on codification, the anthropological concept of culture. In the midst of the discussion, a peasant who by banking standards was completely ignorant said, now I see that without man, there is no world. When the educator responded, let's say for the sake of argument that all the men on earth were to die, but that the earth itself remained, together with trees, birds, animals, rivers, seas, the stars, wouldn't all this be a world? Oh no, the peasant replied emphatically. There would be no one to say this is a world. The peasant wished to express the idea that there would be lacking the consciousness of the world, which necessarily implies the world of consciousness. I cannot exist without a non-I. In turn, the not I depends on that existence. The world which brings consciousness into I don't know if that's a misspelling, existence, because ESISTNC in my book, but existence becomes the world of that consciousness. Hence, the previously cited affirmation of Sartre, la conscience et le monde sont dormes d'un même coup. As men and women simultaneously reflecting on themselves and on the world increase the scope of their perception, they begin to direct their observations towards previously inconspicuous phenomena. It says, in perception, properly so called as an explicit awareness, I am turned towards the object, to the paper, for instance. I apprehend it as being this here and now. The apprehension is a signing out. Every object having a background and experience. Around and about the paper lie books, pencils, inkwell, and so forth. And these, in a certain sense, are also perceived, perceptually there in the field of intuition. But whilst I was turned towards the paper, there was no turning in their direction, nor any apprehending of them, not even in a secondary sense. They appeared and yet were not singled out, were not posited on their own account. Every perception of a thing has such a zone of background intuitions or background awareness. If intuiting already includes the state of being turned towards, and this also is a conscious experience, or more briefly, a consciousness of, all indeed that in point of fact lies in the co-perceived objective background. So when I was reading this, I was wondering, was this going into that conversation we had before about objectivism and subjectivism? I wasn't really sure, but one of the things I'll open it up for us to dialogue real quick. But one of the things that I was noticing is that this peasant, he says, I'm gonna get real quick. He says, now I see that without man, there is no world. When the educator responds, let's say when he started to have this dialogue with this peasant, he had mentioned that the peasant was totally ignorant. And I thought about that when we was talking about earlier, how as you can see, the educator, like when Eldon, when you was mentioning earlier about a person can't not come up and know anything about a subject and start speaking. So what I was seeing is this was exactly what you meant. You know, it has to be a situation where as though the person has to know, or the person has to have gone through these dialogues. You just can't come and start blabbering off the mouth and speaking on a situation that you haven't.
Let me just say this to finish that thought. He was totally ignorant, right? But look what he says. A peasant who by banking standards was completely ignorant. So he appears to be talking about the banking standard. This man would be considered uneducated. But what he begins to show is that this man, in his own way, began to describe the consciousness of the human being, that no, there is no world without anyone to say it is. So it appears he's showing that even though this man, according to banking standards, which would be a peasant who just need to be taught, Freire is giving an example of he knows things. And that's why he was revealing that the peasant wished to express the idea that there would be lacking the consciousness of the world, which necessarily implies the world of consciousness. So that's what he was actually trying to express, saying without man, it wouldn't be a world. But to others, he would be ignorant. But Freire is showing, no, there's an intelligence here, even for him to perceive that. That's what I gather from what he's saying, from my understanding. I'll yield.
Gotcha. Anybody else want to add something on to that? Okay, yeah, no, thank you, Elder. I appreciate that, because I was looking at that and it took like I'm glad you cut my thought, you know what I mean, the way you did, because I was ready to say, you know, I'm sure you knew what I was ready to say, so I ain't got to reiterate that. But no, I didn't pay attention to that. That's why it says a peasant who by banking standards was completely gotcha. Yeah, it's speaking in reference to that particular situation, whereas though by banking standards, like, you know, by the way we're taught in this society with, you know, this method, right, the banking method, you know, these educators would say, this man is dumb. He don't know nothing. He's an object. And I mean, he needs to be filled. He's like a receptacle. He needs to have information deposited into him. But yeah, you're right. Mr. Freire was showing an example of how this man understood, and he even had his own, not his own, but he had a perspective on consciousness. He had a perspective on what the world would. Yeah, I didn't pay no attention. I was ready to come from a whole different angle. Oh, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Also, I wanted to bring out the fact that he said, well, I want to get it real quick. Hold on, bear with me 1 second. It says, yeah, it's at the bottom. I want to read it again to make sure I get the thought back. Yeah, the last part, it says, as women and men simultaneously reflecting on themselves and on the world increase their scope of their perception, they begin to direct their observations towards previously inconspicuous phenomena. Oh, so things that were once a mystery to them, as they start to go through this, not this reflection, but as they start to go through this new intellectual form of educating. Observation. Okay. They start to go back to previously things that were inconspicuous, things that were mysteries to them. They start to go back and see if they can not even see, but they not practice, but they actually go back and find out how to deal with old, I guess, old hindrances or hurdles. Because it says phenomena. So they go back and look at things that basically seem to be immovable objects, mountains, and they try to go back. These particular people who are involved in the revolution or this liberating praxis, they go back and revisit things that seem to be almost concrete or cemented in society.
And they're increasing their scope of their perceptions, or they're gaining more intelligence and insight while they're doing it. He said they increase the scope of their perception. They begin to direct their observations toward previously and conspicuous phenomena. Yeah, it's like this continual growth. They're going back and reflecting and growing, and now they learn more. They go back and look at, like you said, things which was somewhat of a mystery. They begin to understand different phenomenons and contradictions and understanding and different nuances and stuff like that that's within society or whatever they're examining. I'll yield.
Okay. So I guess we're right up against, oh, not right up against, but we're near the 11 o'clock hour. We had 10:56. So this evening, I'll pause my reading. I'll reach out this week to the next comrade who's coming up to read and see what can we work out, make sure everything is right with their schedule, and whatever needs to be done to make things happen, that's exactly what we'll do. We're all family here, we're comrades, we all actually have good communication with one another. So I'll reach out to the next reader, and through the grace of God, we'll be back next Thursday, and we'll continue and close out chapter 2 if the Almighty allows to. But it's a lot of information that causes us to stop and start and, examine things, because that's what we're doing. We're having a dialogue, and we're also examining this book titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So Elder gave us again and gave me again this evening the okay to take our time with it, try to digest it. I really liked the fact that our previous reader, Elder Sister Kaya, she encouraged not encouraged, but she kind of gave the ideal look 2 pages at a time, because there's a lot being said. And then Comrade Aki came on and said, look, man, it's a lot to digest sometimes. So I think it's very good that we're going to take our time with it and just read it slowly, slow roast it, because the whole thing about this book that I'm realizing is that this book, and I was mentioning that earlier, this book causes self-reflection. If you really pay attention to it, it shows how we've been oppressed. It's showing us the banking concept of education. So all these things have made me go back to my teens and my 20s, you know what I mean, to realize how was information presented to me. I was never really given problem-posing education, except for when I went to trade schools. You got to troubleshoot vehicles and diagnostics and stuff like that. That's the only time I really, because, you're dealing with the real world, you're dealing with problems. But other than when it comes to social issues or social problems in high school, I was never given, the problems posing that. I was only showed that this is what you do so you don't face those problems. You learn X, Y, and Z, you get this certificate, and you know what I mean? So I really appreciate that the literature has brought out a lot of things that I've never even thought about before, never even considered. I mean, it wouldn't even have crossed my mind, to be honest. But again, did anybody else want to bring something or add anything to the tonight's discussion?
Yeah, I would say you hear me mention that, okay, we're rebuilding, and this is relatively new. This is probably just going into like the 3rd season of the book readings, technically, starting from the Communist Manifesto. And again, this isn't like a book reading just to read. Probably 98 to 99% of the literature that will be presented, book readings, they're going to have to be studied. So like you can read a novel once, you can watch a movie once, but the stuff that we're looking at is going to require, that's what it's there for. And it's going to require study, reflection, because this is what strengthens, just like you have one, whether training or lifting weights, to strengthen themselves physically. This will strengthen the theoretician. It's a training where you going to be exposed to different thoughts, and we're all actually going to, pretty much like you just said, we're actually going to be trained and brought into a world where we're going to perceive things like we haven't perceived them before. And this entails a new way of observation and reflection and dialogue with people. Now you will be trained to analyze certain things. Like when I would listen to them, or as I still listen and learn from the elders, the revolutionaries, the teachers. I remember Michael Pernetti, I think his last name is Pernetti, listening to him talk in one of his lectures. And again, something as simple as a pencil, you give it to the average person, they just use it to write with it. But once you enter into this world of dialogue and learning from a revolutionary social political perspective, that pencil will never look the same to you again, because you're going to pay attention to things that the average person didn't pay attention to with a pencil. You're going to think about where the lead come from. You're going to think about where the paint come from to paint the pencil. You're going to think about what timber mines and forests, the trees come from to use the wood of the pencil. You're going to think about the rubber plantations for the eraser of the pencil. That pencil, that one pencil itself, will present a world before you, simply because of the way in which we've been trained. It's not just a writing utensil anymore, but through critical thinking, you're thinking about how it even came to be, what shipped it and manufactured it to get it into your hands. All of that will become important as theoreticians in social sciences. From the pencil, as we say, to the food that comes to our plate. It's no longer just on the plate because it comes from the supermarket. You're thinking about the entire production process. And that's how we analyze the world critically, understand the nature of our enemy, critically understand what we need to do, what's needed, what kind of education is needed for others to also analyze the world from that perspective. So therefore, the literature we read, it's intense. And it's not just to read a book to say I read the book. No, this is to read over and over. So whether it's this, the manifesto, communism in the Bible, all of these books and much more literature is to be studied and carefully analyzed, because it truly changed the very nature of the way we perceive the world. And so, I just wanted to share that. So I'll yield with that.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that, Elder. Thank you. Did anybody else want to bring anything else up? Or have any final remarks?
Yeah, I'll say this. Even though it's a difficult read, it's not a problem because we can get it. Because the actual scriptures used to be a difficult read, but now that we're learning what that language is, it's more fluent now, and that's and it's taking that with this. Not that it can't be done and it can't be understood. It's just gonna take time to process it and understand it. So yeah, I'm it's all good. It's a good book. It's a good book, and like I said, I can understand a whole lot of what's being said, but it's just the details, the language, the way they're expressing it that's sometimes rather difficult. But I've never read this book before, so I should expect that. So it's all good, no problems.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that about the Bible, because that's one of the things I was thinking as Elder was explaining, about, like the novel kind of situation. The Bible, I know, me personally, I used to read it like a novel. Pastors and people from churches that I used to go, I can, now that I, consider or I reflect on it, even still to this day, a lot of people from different religious sects and groups, they read it as a novel. You can hear from their interpretations, you can hear from their breakdowns on certain scriptures and whatever that they're reading, like in a novelist type of fashion. But how we were taught to read it at the Knesset, now we read it through those critical eyes or those analytical eyes. And I think like all of it, you know, the reading of the scriptures and reading these different books, Pedagogy of the Press, uh, uh, um, uh, People's History, Howard Zinn's book, Communism in the Bible, Communism in the Faith. I think that all this is like the perfecting of our faith. Like, you know, when people ask us the hope that's within us, you know, I feel as though as I'm learning, as I'm continuing to learn, you know, when I'm ready to give an answer, my answer can be so, you know, it can be so enlightened to an individual who lack unbelief or have unbelief that, you know, they'll consider what I'm saying and they want to study. So I think that, you know, all of this process, you know, getting like frustrated because I know half of this week just trying to get through half of the end of chapter 2. It frustrated me. I went back and keep seeing where the parallels were at, but you know, I never get discouraged at that only because again, I think that it's the perfecting of our faith. You know what I mean? You know, why I know we were taught that that faith was immuna, a supportive action. So why, you know, why do we support God? Why do we want, and by reading all these books, it's more than just, oh, we want to do the commandments, you know what I mean? So that's how I used to think, oh, I want to go to heaven. Like, no, it's more than that because it's you know, once when you see what the Almighty's intent is to bring, well, not to bring, well, now it is to bring, but it's always been for us to live on this earth and enjoy the creation that it has, you know, created. Now is to bring man back to the table to love one another as thyself, to love thy brother in thy heart. So, you know, now I'm beyond the point of, you know, all this business. I want to go to heaven. You know what I mean? Like, you know, of course I want to do God's will and please God. But when I understand that God's will and doing his will is the servants of my brother, of my sister, you know what I mean? To be a help, you know what I mean? I mean, everything in the sense of, you know, just help, everything in the sense, not just help. I'm using it for lack of a better word, but when you start to see what God's mission and his program is about, that's what encourages me to constantly struggle with the literature or constantly read the scriptures. And even when I don't understand something, look, go back and watch some classes from the elders, go back and listen to some recordings, because it's really opened up my eyes to show me that this is something that we must do if we are ambassadors of God, or if we are the reflection, if we're made in the image of God. God is about establishing order and justice. This is something that we must do. We must learn this literature, these writings, so that way when we go out in the street to evangelize, if the Lord, you know, decides to use us, if we're blessed to be used, when we go outside, you know, people will hear, and we can transform our world. But if you going outside with the same message that everybody else going outside, people are tired of hearing, you know, one day and he on his way, and people are tired of hearing all that stuff. Like, no, I'm trying to go outside and give the homeless person, or give the whoever, the drug addict, whoever, give that person some encouraging words that really transform and transfigurate everything about them. But I think that happens through a process of us perfecting our faith, and we're perfecting that faith by studying. You know, why are we supporting God? Why are we so vigorous in our support for God? Because we have cultivated all of these different revolutionaries' writings and their sentiments, along with the writings of the prophets, to be able to say, no, this is the right way, without a doubt. It ain't no, you know what I mean? Maybe, you know, individuals can add something onto it. Of course they can. Not maybe, they can. But when it comes to like, how do we chop the text up, and how do we, you know, interpret the text? No, this is the way, through political education, through political science. This is the way we see the text. This is the way that the text was intended to be read. And I think that by us, you know, coming from that angle, uh, uh, people will see the truth of God. They'll see the beauty of the creation, the beauty of the heavens, and so forth and so on. So like, I agree with exactly what you said, Conrad. Like, yo, it is a difficult read, and the scriptures are even difficult to read at certain point in times. But yeah, the perfecting of our faith, man, I think that is very important. No matter what happens, to constantly come back and look. I gotta eat. Like, I gotta look. I'm full. I'm gonna step away from it for a minute, but I gotta come back and, you know, I gotta grub, because at the end of the day, man, this is not something In other words, like I hear a lot of guys on Clubhouse and different, whatever, different teachings. And you can kind of like, now that I'm kind of getting more mature in the scriptures and learning and studying, you can see like a lot of these guys, they like to have the knowledge in order to say they captain so-and-so or they brother so-and-so. But as I got this knowledge, it made me even more, it made me even more meek, if you will, or it made me want to even do more of a service to help my neighbor, my brother, my sister. It made me even, it didn't puff me up as I got this knowledge, or as I'm getting it. It's making me see more so how, look, man, even if I had to be a doormat in the kingdom of heaven, that's okay. You know what I mean? So like, I think that this information is very helpful and useful, because it makes you get away from yourself. It makes you get away from that self-autonomy, that selfishness. It makes you really consider the other person. So yeah, I don't want to go on and on, but you absolutely right. It's a definitely, you know what I mean, a study, and it's a hard one, but it's worth it. But I yield though.
Yeah, I would like to say this. The season in which we see social issues, we have to take advantages of it. Each and every person in their respective places that we are, I would say, because now what we're reading here, we have to put it to the praxis. We have to put it in motion. And so it's very important and needful for brothers and sisters, wherever you are, if you're going to participate in the work, to find time to do some sort of a street work. Okay? Safely, of course. Even if you have to comb through your local bulletins, find out what sit-ins are going on, so you can get familiar with whatever struggle is happening in the area, or something going on in the area for a struggle that they're dealing with nationwide or even globally, which God willing, we'll discuss in the future. And the tools you need is a pen, a clipboard, and a piece of paper. Hopefully a professional type. Hopefully our not leaflets, because we have flyers, but our brochures also will be helpful. We're going to have to do street work. That's just it. I mean, if you're going to build and start to build in your areas, or else we will be stagnant. So you're going to have to do some sort of a street work. You're going to have to do some sort of an intentional face-to-face communication with people. And it's not just to give them a flyer and they walk away. You want to get their information. This is important, because I repeat it, and I want people to understand this is important. Because if we don't do this part, then we might as well not even come together to do this. You see, because it's just, we gotta begin to apply things in which we're learning and begin to reach out and get into that arena, of our public environments where we are in our communities. And we want to organize. So it's not just handing out a flyer. Sometimes you will, don't get me wrong. You're just gonna hand out a flyer because some people got to keep it going. But you got, in the streets, they trying to get somewhere. But you got to make an intentional effort to get a name, email, get them on a mailing list. That's very important. Without this happening, then the organization will become stagnant and probably will decrease. It's people that's needed. Not only will you be gathering people or getting familiar in your environment while you learning a technique to get people attention in your area, learning what to say to get people attention, learning about people, that you will also begin to be seen and known. So different areas, different places where we are, there's different risk involved. So safety is important, especially if you're by yourself. It's extremely difficult in different places because of the the media or this disgruntled black or white people performing violence against each other. So this isn't like a so-called Russellite track that you just give someone here, believe the Lord here, say your prayers and come down to the altar call. No, this is different. So we definitely have to proceed with caution, but we have to proceed with organizing. Pen, pad, you got one, get it. If you need one, okay, we got to send you one or send you money to get one. Pen, pad, or should I say a piece of paper with a clipboard so you can hold some flyers. Presentation is important. See you with a clipboard, look like you about your business. And what I also want people to start to try to do, this experiment that I've been performing lately, is begin to ask people in your respective areas, no matter where you are, in the country, out of the country, would they be interested in organizing or building a new political party? That kind of a pitch, I think, appeals to whether they're religious or not. And that political party, of course, we probably, Nazarene Messianic Party, whatever we want to call it. But this is laying a foundation of political education. So now we're going to invite them, because this political party must be disciplined and educated in politics. And this is, you want to begin to learn to explain why you're saying a new political party based on God, which will be something new, but it's going to be something you're going to have to wrestle with because people's perceptions of God. So you're going to have to be equipped to handle that argument, to show, no, we're talking about God from a social political perspective, not according to the West. You got to continue to make it that differentiation or distinction. And that alone will probably get people's interest to sign this sheet. See how many names you can get who's interested in a political party. And then you can explain, well, in a political party, we have to be educated, or else we're going to be like the Democrats, Republicans, and all the rest of these political parties that's useless. Anybody, before I go further, anybody have any questions or comments, or you understand what I'm expressing?
Yes, sir. Elder, loud and clear, sir. On my end, yes, sir.
Yeah, I understand too.
As well here, I understand what you mean too. I think you mean going out engaging people and trying to build a group, a political party, but people that are competent in with political knowledge and things of that nature, not just based on emotion or reactionary, but competent in the social issues and what's going on in the world from a biblical base, religious political base. I believe that's what you're saying.
Yeah, we have to make, and that's what be part of our job, is to make them competent. If God allow us to be competent, we have to make them. So we got 3. Anybody else? I sort of, we have people in different areas. I just want to make sure everybody here and give me some type of acknowledgement on what's being, because this is important. You know what I mean? Other than that, this is nothing if we not all understanding that. I'll yield. So I want to hear more from people. They understand what we're talking.
I want to add something, Brother Judah. In addition to the political education and organizing people, I think we need to start looking at creating some parallel structures or alternatives to the status quo, a better way of doing things so that people have a real alternative.
Yes, I agree. And I think that those answers will be, that will be part of our task, actually, in educating people on the purpose of organizing a new political party wherever we are on the basis of the creator. Because now we have to figure out alternatives. We have to deal with new methods of doing things. So yes, I agree.
Hey, I was looking at this morning, I was looking at Isaiah 60. And it's with this political, do you think that this political, like this new political party that we actually discussing right now, could that be like a branch of that prophecy there of them coming to the light? Would this be part of that light? Because we'll forget it, wrong or right. I think I could see that.
If we do it right, I believe so. I think that's part of the inspiration, because the political party aspect is what brings us into world affairs, or it brings us into the real world where everything is happening,
Right. Yeah. And to where they also, sorry to cut you off, sir. I did that earlier. I'm rude. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, matter of fact, finish your thought. Go ahead.
Finish. I didn't pay attention earlier. I don't even know. I didn't notice it earlier, but go ahead. What you gonna say?
Dang, I'm like Nebuchadnezzar. The thing just left me.
You done left you? Okay. Well, when it comes back to you, just go ahead and bring it back up. But yeah, it brings us into the real world where real things are. When things happen on a daily basis, it's involving everybody. And I believe that there are different worlds. You have this one world, this religious world. They're literally in their own world. That's why they debate and talk about things, because they just off somewhere else. But when we get into the political world, then what we have learned from the Bible, we involve it real time. This is where the action is, in so many words. This is where the action is. You remember?
Okay. Yeah, I got it. When you said the real world, bring it into the real world. Because this would, like I said, the forces, the forces of the Gentiles should come unto thee, and all of this stuff. Like, this is, like, right now, the world is doing the job of Israel, as I see explained in Isaiah 60. Like, for instance, like, you got your, I think I've explained this here before. I think I was on Brother Benaiah with Zadok that time. I don't know. But it was like when things happen, you got the Forgotten Harvest, Salvation Army, things like that. That's real world stuff that when people are needed for assistance, these are the names: Salvation Army, FEMA, Gleaners. These are the things in the real world that people utilize, and it rolls off the tongue. But this is supposed to be Israel. I think that's what I'm seeing. And you said it perfectly. That's real world. And a political party to event, like, this is almost like what the Black Panthers on a small, minute scale was doing when they were, doing the school breakfasts and the the breakfast programs and things like that. That was just on a small level. They hadn't grown yet. But it was a political base.
Yes.
And that's what I'm seeing here, that it could start off, however small it starts off, as the stone. But it's growing into that mountain that fills the whole earth. That this is where the whole earth, this is the substance. This is where you get this, you get the, you see what I'm trying to say here?
I see what you're saying 100%. And that is exactly what I'm saying. This is exactly where we get. That's why when I express, that's the sort of the idea I have when I'm expressing. Listen, don't really get caught up in trying to convert this camp person here. If they hear, they hear. You understand? But we don't even want to really play in that arena, because it's off. Right. It's not even really. That's why with people who have real life issues, they're not really worried about what these cats debating about. But and so and even those who are debating, they're out of touch with the real world. And when they are suffering, sometimes they fade out of the camp because the camp isn't directed to the real world. So now they suffering. Cat talking about he's suffering, he can't do this and do that. They ain't seen him in camp in a while, they say. Well, because he done got hit in the real world. So, sometimes the people who are in camp, they got a job and it's all this other stuff. So they can debate these other things, and trying to convert them to what we're saying, some of them, they all right. But when at least what they think they are. But when we enter into this world where now we're not even worried about camps per se, we're looking at real life issues and people who's in the camp, so-called, once we start to touch on real life issues that's affecting them, that's not being addressed in quote unquote camp, that's going to get their attention, I believe. But
and you know what else? Because I'm on that page. I just been, keeping it to myself. I'm on that page. This is what I've been seeing. And in that, it's giving me peace with all that. Like eat Sunday morning Christians, camps, it's giving me peace. That doesn't, like, that bounces off me now. That doesn't get my attention like it used to do, because now I see a huge focus, because just right there in Isaiah 60 alone, that's real life stuff. Those are real people, whoever they are. Those are real people. Do you understand what I'm saying? And
I understand.
They come off the page to me, and they're real people. So who's going to step in those shoes of the people in those pages right there?
That's very important I would say, to perceive it that way. And so therefore our arena for evangelizing changes. So now it is the common person. It's as Marxman would say, the working class people, the people working at the gas stations, the people, the carpenters, the police officers, people who's in the real world. Now we introduce this message to them. This is our pool. Some of these people may be in a church, they may not be in a church, but that's secondary to us now, because we're looking at the real world and we're presenting the Bible in a way, like you said in Isaiah, that actually changes their real world, or like Freire is arguing. So this process of presenting information that causes the people to reassess their positions, this is the manner in which the gospel should be preached. So when they reassess their situation, the good news is that this concrete reality of oppression can be changed. And this is the method in which we're using to educate. And this is, I believe, where we will start to see changes in the real world. Now it's going to go beyond just our religious ritual. It's going to affect the very foundations of the institutions that exist today. But we have to get into that arena. And so when we walk in there and say, listen, we're talking about setting up a new political party that represents poor and oppressed people, and God as its foundation. I don't think they had that before in our dispensation here in the West. So that's why it's important to relook at what we're dealing with. Our pool of evangelism. Listen, like I said, don't worry about the Muslim and all of that. No, let's look at political affairs. Understanding what people need. Find out what's going on. Not even if we probably can't do nothing about it at the moment because we're so small, but we still learn. And as we gather, because we get names, we get addresses, because we need that. Let's see who's interested in political. See how many signatures you can get. See the replies you can get. And watch possibly the conversations going to get into what they're suffering in this real life. And I will also say this too, which I've noticed in different experiments, because I had an experience yesterday out there experimenting. And again, you try to talk to all, but there is a sharp contrast between the cool people and the others who's not as popular. You know, cool ones don't really have much of a day, they don't have time, they're too busy being cool. So I ran into some of them yesterday, and maybe later they will learn. But what's interesting is that in the experiment, I also went to a Narcotics Anonymous group. And so why I'm bringing this up is because I'm looking at two aspects of society. The Narcotics Anonymous group, they're older people, of course. They've been through the ringer, but they probably used to be cool and wanted to fit in with the crowd. But right now they humbled and they're looking for an answer and trying to find out why this has happened to them, why they have these, what's going on. This is also a potential place to sort of organize. Also, what got my attention, what they were saying about the Panthers, is that they appealed to possibly high school dropouts, people on the outskirts of the marginalized in the educational systems, because I'm learning it's this way everywhere, meaning this. You have the aristocracy, big ruling class, but you also have a labor aristocracy, middle class people, got good jobs, teachers and professionals. They got kids. Sometimes they kids ain't hungry. They could run around, they got the nicest clothes and this and that. Well, it continues, and sometimes a little bit more difficult to reach them. So our target might be the poorer kids, not necessarily the kids with the brand new Jordans on, but it may be that kid that you look down at his shoes and they scuff. It may be that kid that's laughed at. And I'm saying that because, again, it's like what we're analyzing, the people who we're targeting. I'm not saying all of them is righteous, but what I'm saying is just look at the poor, look at the oppressed, and these are part of our target. Don't forget to make way to talk to them. That kid been kicked out of school now. He trying to get his GED. Why? Was he hungry at home? Was he picked on in school? What is it? And so we have to analyze all of this while we're getting names, we're getting numbers, maybe offering these kids or young adults places to go to. That's our next step. If we can get signatures for interest, then our class is broadened. And that means all of us on now who's learning now will become more educators, partaking in this process as we deal more with the load. But I just definitely want to make it clear our target. Look for those poor. Look for those who's probably not as popular. Don't ignore the popular, but target them out a bit. Go to some of the meetings. You may have you attend some of these narcotic meetings and stuff like that. You may find a couple of jewels in there of people who will help, or even who's running it. They may allow you to say a few words. Children programs who's trying to help children who've been thrown out of school and keep them out of trouble. Find out about them if you can in your certain areas, if it's possible. This is a part of that experiment and dialogue. So now what we learning in free air, how else are you going to put this to the test unless you move out and start to do that? So I heard from Akish, Sister Sue. Job, you on with us? Can you hear me?
I can hear.
No, I was seeing if Job was on. Job Paul. Okay, he could have stepped away. Not everyone is on, but again, this is something that we gotta respond to this one. I want everybody to understand who's going to do anything. What this is about. So now we're gonna have to do the practice. Because I tell you, I talk to people right now, individual calls, and I tell them about the situation. Oh yeah, they call when they got a question about different things, and oh yeah, I'm meaning to call you this and that. I see other people in person. Look, you know, I only spend so much time with that myself personally. Whenever they ready, but I'm not waiting on them. So it's really like, okay, so everyone who's consistent, who's on, these are the next steps, you know, and they work, and they're going to work simultaneously. Okay, so don't just let the stuff you learn in, just don't let it pass. If you got opportunity, somebody get your ear, you get someone's ear, I should say, get their information. You got to.
Hey, can I say something else,
Yes, sir.
Brother Judah?
Go ahead, my brother.
First of all, I just like all the comrades that's on. I know the teachers. I know y'all already know, but and you know the others may know. But I'm just saying, read Isaiah 60 just from that real world vantage point. Just read that chapter. And also, though, what I wanted to say is, and this is also what I see is that, like, it's more than one. It's more than one way, and I don't mean it like it sounds. Meaning that it's more than just one process. There's a whole lot of different processes that people have their hands in that accord though has to be a single mind. Like how it speaks about the body and no schisms in the body, but there are different functions to the body. Like what you explaining right here. You're saying take your notepad, take your pencil, hit the streets, talk to this person, talk to that person, see if they were like what they think about a political party. Well, not only that though, like whatever you're doing, use that too. That's a tool. Like I do music, that's a tool. Sister Kaya, she teaches. That's a tool. Slide all of that in. That's what I'm seeing, because it's nothing is off limits, basically. Like ain't no rules for this. The only rule is to obey the Most High and His laws. And what I'm seeing is just something I can't even explain it properly, but I promise you, I was in my bed. I hadn't even got up. I woke up, I grabbed my phone, and it was like Isaiah 60 was on my head. I read the whole chapter while I was in bed before I even put my feet on the floor. And I just started seeing that real world. Like, man, this is something different. This is how it's going to be. And this is going to involve flesh. And all kind of stuff was just coming to my mind this morning. And man, I was just like, before I even rolled up, I just would start giving them thanks. Like, man, thanks for pouring that into me before I even got up. And then to come tonight, and this is, you know, it fits right into what we talking about. It ain't crazy. It's just the works of the Most High, I guess, man. But like I was trying to say, I think it's every way that people function has got to be in use for this, because this is the redemption of mankind, the whole world. From what I see there, everybody gonna bring their forces into it. Whatever they were doing, that mean they're gonna stop that and bring it to this cause. So this cause has to be doing something immaculate for them to stop what they're doing and all their evil practices, all their systems of government, all of that, for them to stop what they're doing and bring it here. And of course, there's going to be resistance at first until they see and notice that resistance is futile. We have to understand that too. I was thinking about that this morning too. Like, dang, they're not just going to roll over at first. It's just so much I was just seeing, man. I'm sorry to take up so much time.
No, you good. You didn't take up too much time. That's good to say. And I guess what I definitely I agree with what you're saying. and I am putting a lot of emphasis on the, what you call it, the idea, or should I say the action of engaging and getting information. And that's what I was,
Because what you're explaining is a grassroots effort
of organizing, because we could say things, whether we do a video, like we could do a video, whether it's music or whether it's a lecture, right?
Right.
And people will walk away from it and say, well, that was good, that was educational, right?
Uh-huh.
But the only thing we did was stimulate.
Right.
We didn't organize. So therefore we have to get them. That's where we're deficient. That's where a lot of movements are deficient.
It's hooking them in to come in and come to the source.
Right. And they may not come into the room right away. So the methods that I have learned from grassroots organizations, even those organizations that I see and sign up to, whether they're political activists, the email is loaded all the time, because they know once we walk away, as long as they got our email address, they constantly send them reminders. So they always being brought back to the mind. So the objective is to not just to stimulate the thought, but to get their information so they can get, whether a daily or weekly basis, NMP popping up, the reminder here, go look at this class coming up here, constantly there. And that's where the organizational process come in, where, hey, you know what, I'm gonna try it this time. Oh, you know what, I've been meaning to do that, I forgot, but this time I'm gonna pop in. But if we just say something, they walk away, we don't know their name, they don't really know us, ain't no telling where that go. Won't see them again, probably.
Yeah, real quick, Elder, I just wanted to say, everything you were saying, man, I'm so much in agreement with, because as you mentioned earlier when you were speaking, this is what we're reading this kind of literature for, you know what I mean, to actually put it to use. It's not, because if not, then it's just banking concept education. If we reading this book and we're not going to do the praxis, or we're not going to participate in this historical process of liberating humanity, then it's going to fall into this whole Thursday night thing is going to fall into the banking concept. And I like also what Ak was saying when he was reading the book of Isaiah, because I've heard people mention to me that in times past about, well, how come we don't write epistles today? And Paul and them was going here and there, and they was writing letters, and how come we not doing that kind of stuff today? And not too long ago, it was last week, I was listening to the book of John on the audio Bible, and John was, we all know the scripture where it says, I'm the one calling out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, make his path. And when I think about stuff like that, that's what, if John is saying that we should make straight the way of the Lord, then how do that, as we learned at the school, how do that look in real time? Is that just us singing songs and just telling people, know the Lord and giving out flyers? Or is that us really doing something that puts us in the real world, like starting a political party? Like, how does that really look? So, I'm just, agreeing with both of you guys were saying, you, Elder and Akish, that, yeah, as we look at this thing, if we're going to make the Lord's way straight and we're going to make his paths, then we have to really do something in the world. According to the book of Isaiah 60, we have to really do something to captivate everyone's attention, which makes them say, hey, look at this group over here. We have never seen nothing like this before. But it just can't be in the realms of, like Mr. Freer mentioned, communist slogans. It can't, that can't be the deal. You know what I mean? It can't be the deal where we just, we're just saying certain things that sound good. Yeah, capitalism is bad, but where are we as far as the political arena, as far as like on stage, where are we? So I think it's very important that, like Ak mentioned, we take the words off the pages and make them come to life, because like you were saying, Elder, these guys, like, don't get me wrong, like Sister Muriel, she pings me in certain rooms and I go inside Clubhouse and listen, but like more and more after that last altercation that I had with those brothers, I see it really less profitable than to debate them, because they're caught in like a science fiction Hollywood type of deal. So, you know, us even talking about creating a political party, the first response they'll have is, no, but we ain't gotta do nothing. God gonna do. You know what I mean? So it's like the conversations with a lot of religious groups is just at this point useless. Like, you know, let's avoid that and let's do something that really has some substance and meaning to it, which is put together a political party, which is make the Lord's path straight. But, you know, in real time, is that just us coming together, you know, and fellowshipping on Zoom? No, because I will argue that all the apostles, they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have cell phones, you know what I mean? They were out in the real world doing stuff. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like trying to get ourselves out there, you know, the NMP, the Knesset, and trying to have different what's it called, little sanctuaries set up all over this country, wherever the comrades are from, whatever states, you can go and find a little hub where, okay, that's the NMP, it's the Nazarene Messianic Party. But I'm in total agreement with that. Yes, sir. I yield.
Yeah. I haven't been on the clubhouse in a couple of weeks, but when I am on there, you definitely have more than just religious groups there. Sometimes just be like some thug rooms, you know, you just got some young people on there talking about some nonsense. Sometimes it may work out to go in there and provoke them to a thought. They may kick you out the room. Okay, they just kicked you out the room. Or they may want to engage. So I'm just saying, like, just the alternative, just because, you know, we may enter a group, that group don't necessarily have to say Torah this or Torah that, or, you know what I'm saying? Okay. Sometimes they already dressed in arrogance. They know it already. But you may go into these other groups, what's going on in the world, who says such and such, the shootings or the new diseases. You know, you just have different groups there that I think I found more interesting to me is going into groups that's not even talking about religion. So that's just an example where we have to broaden it. When we looking at people dealing with real world affairs, and the more we learn, we can learn how to carry on a conversation addressing those things, you know, and that's going to be important. And again, that just shows the importance of really learning, because I can't tell people enough, you know, what you put in it is what you're going to get out, you know, just the consistency, you know, people, brothers and sisters, I'm not going to be arguing about who's not consistent. Only thing I'm going to argue is when they come and talk about this and that, well, you should have been there. You know, at the end of the day, you can't blame nobody. You know what I'm saying? Different struggles people have trying to do this and do that. Listen, you got to put the time in. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm not really going to talk about that too much. Everyone have their time, and I pray that they hold on. My thing is to continue to spread, just to continue to spread, go like the sower went forth to sow, planted the seeds all over the place. That's what it's about. I'm not really like I don't understand it where you get an individual where you just trying to force them to be interested. No, I'm not into that, because I don't understand that to be profitable. When I'm interested in something, I'm interested, just like everybody else. Whenever you're interested in something, you there, you're gonna do it. So it's just to keep it moving, because you have people who haven't heard it yet, possibly. And that's why we've been dispatched. And those who are his, he said, they're going to identify to it. They're going to identify, they're going to recognize, hey, it's something to this. And that's why it's just so important to continue to spread the word, because if you get locked in, you get into just your little group you're in, because we're familiar and we have experienced this before. And 90-something% of those people gone, they doing something else. And, you know, my thing is to keep it moving. So it hurt some people's feelings more than others that people did what they did. But I'm really not, it's not just this little group deal or big group, whatever it is, because you fall into sectarianism. That's what Freire is going to talk about as well. Sectarianism, or a form of statism. You're just looking at this isolated group. No, it's like a waterfall. If you have a pond by itself with no other source of water, it gets stale. Mosquitoes, it breeds terrible things. So it got to be a continual flow. You got to keep bringing people in, you know, and then the Most High gonna temper that out. He gonna balance that out with faithful laborers. And those who not faithful will go about their business. And maybe they'll find it later. I'm not here to go back and forth with them or that and who they are as a servant. I'm not into all of that. I don't know none of that. God only knows. But I'm into the part where what's happening now. Okay, you call yourself a servant all you want to, and only God really knows it. Maybe you'll come in later, but we're talking about what's happening now. And so we out there spreading this word. So brothers and sisters, whoever gonna hear it, they're gonna come and give a hand. And I don't mean clapping. I mean clapping and finding out what they can do to spread this more. You know what I mean? Because that's where the survival lies. If we don't spread, we perish. That's just how it goes with anything. So, you know, we're competing. Capitalism, if it don't spread, it dies. So, you know, the kingdom of God must grow. And if we're part of that kingdom, that is most important. That's what we have to do. So I agree, man. I'm on that Isaiah 60. You know, in fact, all of that leads to it. Because Isaiah 59 is another good favorite. It's one of the other favorites, which it precedes Isaiah 60. It shows the necessity of Isaiah 60, because Isaiah 59 talks about the injustice and the crooked paths of injustice that men had taken. Now the transformation, rise and shine. Lord light is shining upon thee. And this is what we, you know, let's put this to the move. Put it to the test. Immigrants, think about, because I know Buffalo is like a refuge city. So we have a lot of immigrants coming from all over, from Asia, Africa, all over the place. And